Chapter 66, ch.66. Katie and Bianca both stuck their tongues out at him before turning to each other and beginning a conversation that began by discussing Katie's problems with Lee Jordan and would soon have dissolved into a moan fest about anything wrong with every man everywhere were it not for the doors to the Great Hall opening and Professor McGonagall leading two lines of frightened-looking first-years towards the head table. "Saved by the first ties," muttered Geoffrey under his breath. Harry grinned, but quickly forced his face to become neutral as both Katie and Bianca turned to glare at them. They all listened dutifully as the school's sorting hat sang a song about the history of the school, how the founders parted and urging them all to unite together, before the sorting ceremony began. Ewan Abercrombie was the first student to be called upon, and he was sorted into Gryffindor. From then it took a good 40 minutes for the hat to sort the rest. Harry noted that there seemed to be a few more new arrivals this year than in years before. There were certainly more than in his year group, which consisted of around 40 kids. This new lot seemed to consist of almost double that. He supposed that his year being so small in numbers was due mostly to the effects of the first was against Voldemort. Those in his year, the one above and the one below, were born in the last few years of the war, when Voldemort and his Death Eaters were at the height of their powers, and not far off of claiming total victory. This new group were obviously the beginnings of a population recovery. Harry felt his stomach tighten as he thought of the fact that Voldemort was now back to physical form, and had at least 30 followers at his side once again. He thought of how he had tried to tell the world this, but no, he told himself, now is not the time to think on that. This is what is important now. Finally Rose Zeller was sorted into Hufflepuff House. Harry saw Susan, Hannah, and their friends cheering for her as she joined them at the Hufflepuff table, and Professor McGonagall took away the sorting hat and the three-legged stool on which it stood. At the staff table, Professor Dumbledore stood up from his seat, a high-backed golden one situated right in the middle, and issued his usual start-of-term greeting. "To our newcomers, welcome. To our old hands, welcome back. There is a time for speech-making, but this is not it. Tuck in." An excited murmur swept through the hall as plates and bowls filled to overflowing with all manner of food appeared up and down the lengths of every table, accompanied by innumerable jugs of pumpkin juice. As those around him began helping themselves to a wide array of meats, potatoes, vegetables, sauces and gravies, Harry took out his wand and began casting a few spells around himself. Katie's fork, on which was speared a piece of chicken, paused halfway to her mouth as she stopped to watch Harry. After the 5th spell she found herself asking, "What are you up to, Harry?" "Diagnostic charms," replied Harry. "I am checking to see if any of the food is laced with potions." "Find anything?" asked Geoffrey, setting his knife and fork down without taking a bite. "Not much," replied Harry. "The pumpkin juice has a mild calming draft in it. But I suspect that it's to help the first years to relax a little and allow everyone else to calm down some from the excitement of being back. Nothing all that sinister and so safe to drink. I don't think I like the idea of there being a potion in my drink, no matter how benign it is," said Bianca. "It could be much worse," replied Harry, tucking his wand back into his pocket. He nodded his head down the table to where the first and second year students were sitting. The second years were getting a little rowdy, and a good number of the first years were looking quite nervous about being in this new sitting. "Looking at that lot, I can't say I blame the staff for giving them a little something to calm them down. I guess," muttered Bianca. "Everything else is clear, by the way," added Harry, spearing a pork chop and putting it onto his plate, followed by a few roast potatoes and a spoonful of mashed carrot and swede. "So why the paranoia, Harry?" asked Katie. "Can it really be called paranoia when they actually are out to get you?" asked Harry. "Who's they?" asked Bianca. "That is information that I am not currently at liberty to divulge," replied Harry, "but let me put it this way, after what happened my first, second, third and fourth years here, I am taking no chances." "The man has a point," agreed Katie. "I mean, there was that troll, your broom going haywire, people being petrified, the Dementors, that Hungarian horntail." She paused for a moment, frowned and then asked, "Why exactly did you come back at all, Harry?" Simple, answered Harry. I like my enemies where I can see them. The 3/6 years all shared a look of surprise as Harry speared a roast potato onto his fork and took a bite. Soon the main course was done with and all of that food vanished, only to be replaced by puddings of every imaginable variety, from fruits, ice creams and creams to cakes, biscuits and pies. As everyone else went to tuck in, Harry took out his wand again. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 67, ch.67. A moment later he called out stop, a little too loudly for his liking, but thankfully the general noise in the hall drowned it out for most people. What's the matter? Asked Geoffrey. Nobody touch the treacle tart, said Harry. I don't know what's in it, but it can't be anything good. Everything else is fine. Isn't that, like, your absolute favorite dessert? Asked Katie. Harry gave her a pointed look, to which her eyes widened and she let out a soft "oh" of comprehension. Harry took one on the red napkins off of the table and collected a piece of treacle tart in it. He then conjured up a small paper bag and charmed it to be unbreakable and impervious to liquids before slipping the napkin-covered slice of tart inside and sealing it shut. He then slipped it into a pocket on the inside of his robes. He looked around him and gave a nervous-looking Katie a wink before helping himself to a bowl of chocolate ice cream. Before long the feast was over, and Dumbledore was standing up once again in order to make his start-of-term speech. Now that we are all fed and watered, I would like to just take a few moments to go through the usual start-of-term notices before we all head off to our beds for the night. First years, please note that the forest in the grounds is out of bounds to all students, and some of our older students could do with remembering that too. As usual, Mr. Filch the caretaker has asked me to remind you all that magic is not permitted to be used in the school corridors. There is also a list of items that are banned from the castle, and the full list can be found fixed to the door of Mr. Filch's office, which is located just off of the entrance hall. And finally, we have 2 changes in staffing this year. The lovely, pink-haired young woman sitting between Professor Snape and Professor Trelawney is Professor Tonks. She has just recently completed her training to become an Auror and has kindly consented to assist us here at Hogwarts by taking on the challenging position of Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor. Good luck, Professor. Tonks stood, gave a polite bow and then sat back down. The students applauded her quite loudly, with many of the older boys being the most vocal. Fred and George Weasley in particular made a spectacle of themselves by wolf whistling loudly and unabashedly. Harry had to agree that she was rather easy on the eyes, especially when compared to most of the other female members of staff. But he had to remember that she was one of Dumbledore's followers, so he would really need to watch himself around her. Once the noise died down, Professor Dumbledore continued, and the woman in the pink cardigan sitting between Professor McGonagall and Professor Sinistra is Professor Umbridge, who has agreed to take leave from her job in the Minister's office at the Ministry of Magic in order to teach history of magic after Professor Binns decided that it was time for him to pass on. The applause that followed was not as loud as the one that Tonks received, but it was certainly louder than Harry had expected. It seemed that a few people were looking forward to seeing what history of magic lessons would be like when they were not taught by a ghost with a monotone voice. Dumbledore continued. Tryouts for the House Quidditch teams will take place on. Hem. Dumbledore broke off and turned towards Professor Umbridge. Given that she was so short, it was not immediately clear that she had gotten to her feet, but as she began to walk out from behind the staff table, it became apparent that she was intending to make a speech. Not now, thought Harry. Wait for Dumbledore to finish first. Interrupting him only gives everyone a bad impression. As she walked along the front of the head table, Professor Umbridge began her speech. Thank you, Headmaster, for those kind words of welcome. I must confess that it is lovely to be back at Hogwarts again, and seeing so many bright and happy faces looking up at me. I'm sure that we are all going to be very good friends. Harry cringed. She was patronizing them. That was just about the worst thing she could be doing. Already she had lost the attention of about a fifth of the students, and Harry found his own attentiveness ebbing away. Professor Umbridge went on to talk a great deal about the importance of education, of passing skills and traditions down through to the next generation. Then something warning against progress just for the sake of progress, followed by something like preserve what must be preserved, perfect what can be perfected, and pruning practices that ought to be prohibited. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 68, ch.68. Harry found himself drawn back when she went on with I am here at the request of the Ministry in order to perfect the teaching of history of magic at this school, something which, I am afraid, has fallen behind the times. If there is anything about this that you wish to discuss, then my door is always open. For that matter, if you have anything else that you wish to discuss, any quibbles or reservations about how the school is being run, then by all means come and have a chat, and we shall see what we can do about it. Or failing that, there is another that you can talk to. In response to several concerns raised by concerned individuals, the Ministry of Magic has seen fit to pass Educational Decree No. 25, creating the post of Student Advisor. This school's very own Harry Potter had very kindly agreed to take up this position, and I will step aside and allow him to explain his new position. Mr. Potter. All eyes turned to Harry, who swallowed hard and then stood. This is it, he thought to himself. Good evening, everyone, he began. I won't keep you long, and I am sure that like me you are longing for your beds. The good professor is correct. The Ministry of Magic has created the position of Student Advisor, and I have consented to take up that position here at Hogwarts. What does that mean exactly? Well, to put it simply, I am now here to be on your side. Got a problem? Come to me and we'll see if we can resolve it. And I mean any problem. Fighting with your dorm mates? Fine, come on over and talk. Feel like you're being treated unfairly by a prefect? Not a problem. Come to me and we'll work together to sort things out. Getting the impression that a teacher is being deliberately unfair to you? Well, I am here to help you fight your corner. At the same time, if you have something that you want to bring up with the staff, again come to me. I will be attending all staff meetings and will be acting as your voice when I am there. Graham Montague, a 6th-year Slytherin who played for his house Quidditch team, chose that moment to stand up and demand, and what makes you think that any of us will come to a stupid Gryffindor like you, Potter? Harry smirked and replied, I am actually glad that you asked that, Graham. You see, in order to work effectively in my new position, the Wizarding Examinations Authority decided, and I agree, that I would need to be a completely neutral party. As such, as of this moment, I am no longer a member of Gryffindor House. I will no longer wear their badge or their colors, I will no longer sleep in their dorms. What about Quidditch? Asked Katie in a small voice. Sorry, Katie, but yes, I will no longer play Quidditch for Gryffindor House. Nor, for that matter, will I be playing for any other house. I will be neutral, devoted to no house over any other. How can we be sure of that? Demanded Theodore Nott, a Slytherin in Harry's year. You wasted no time in doing Malfoy and Parkinson a bad turn on the train. Prefect Malfoy and Prefect Parkinson were found to be behaving in a manner unbefitting students of their position and so were punished for it, replied Harry. I don't know what they have been telling you throughout the course of dinner, but I assure you that any prefect behaving in such a way, be they Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff or Gryffindor, would have received the same punishment. In my time at Hogwarts I have seen several students appointed to the position of prefects simply because they were a favorite of their head of house. And I have seen several prefects who have abused their position for their own gains. That ends now. I have been granted the authority to step in if a prefect is acting out of line, and I have been granted the power to punish any prefect that goes too far. Actions have outcomes. It is high time that people were held accountable for theirs. And with that Harry sat down again, to complete silence. Professor Dumbledore, who looked paler than anyone could ever remember seeing him before, got to his feet and announced, "You are all dismissed." "See you guys later," said Harry to Katie, Bianca, and Geoffrey. "I've got a few people to round up, and then we're all going for a meeting in Dumbledore's office." At Professor McGonagall's insistence, of course. He got up and left. "Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60 plus premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 69, ch.69. Harry hurried over to the Ravenclaw table. He couldn't reach Padma through the jostling crowd of students who were evacuating their seats, but by waving his arms about he caught her attention and she fought her way over to him. "Change of plans," said Harry once they were face to face. "Dumbledore and McGonagall want to see me in the headmaster's office. Flitwick and Snape are going to be there too, so we're going to do this all at once." "Not a problem," replied Padma. "Need some help rounding up the Slytherins?" "That would be appreciated," answered Harry. "Could you round up Daphne, Tracy, and Astoria? I'm gonna go grab Malfoy, Parkinson, Crabbe, and Goyle." "Good luck," said Padma as she turned and headed off towards the 3 Slytherin girls. Draco Malfoy elbowed a third-year hard in the side as he shoved his way towards the doors. He was supposed to be showing the first years down to the Slytherin common room in the dungeons, but he was in a foul mood. Anyway, if the little shits couldn't keep up with the crowd of other Slytherins, then why should it be his problem? He had just made it to the doors when he found his way blocked. "Get out of it, Potter," he snapped. "I'm going nowhere without you, Malfoy," retorted Harry. "Not until we've sorted out your punishment." "I thought what happened on the train was my punishment." "Nope. That was because I had just caught you red-handed and knew that you could not be trusted to not go out seeking revenge. Your solitary confinement was for everyone's benefit. Now come on, we're going to have a word with your head of house." Malfoy's eyes lit up, imagining all the insults that Professor Snape would throw at Harry before kicking him out of his office and sweeping this whole mess under the rug like he always did. "Really?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. "We most certainly are," said Harry. "In the headmaster's office. With the headmaster. And the deputy headmistress. Oh, and Professor Flitwick." Malfoy seemed to wilt right before Harry's eyes. Harry looked around and saw the other 3 that he was looking for: Parkinson, Crabbe, Goyle. "You too?" "What?" demanded Parkinson. "Meeting with your head of house and 3 other members of staff. Hang on." He looked around and spotted who he was looking for: Professor Umbridge. The new History of Magic professor hurried over. "What is it, Mr. Potter?" "Professor McGonagall has forced a change in how my meeting with the head of Slytherin House will occur. It will now be taking place in the headmaster's office, with Professors Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Flitwick in attendance, as well as Professor Snape. I was just wondering if you would consent to come up and add a bit of weight to the proceedings, otherwise it will only be myself and Prefect Paddle fighting our corner." "I'd be happy to," replied Madame Umbridge. "Let's see if we can get this all sorted out, shall we?" "Good," said Harry, looking around. "Ah, here they come now. Padma, over here." Padma made her way over, followed by a rather reluctant-looking trio of Slytherin girls. "Are these the victims?" asked Professor Umbridge. "Yes they are," replied Harry. "Let's get this over with. I'd like to get these 3 to the hospital wing for a check over." "We don't need to go the hospital wing, Potter," said Daphne. "Are you sure?" asked Harry. It was quite a scuffle, after all. He gave the 3 girls a very subtle wink. The only others to see it were Padma and Crabbe, and of them Padma was saying nothing and Crabbe was too dumb to do so. Tracy was the one to catch on first. "Actually, I hurt my wrist when I was trying to get Pansy to let go of Daphne. I think that I would like it looked at." Daphne looked at her friend, realized what she was doing, turned back to Harry and said, "Well, I suppose my nose should be looked at after it was hit so hard." Astoria nodded in agreement. "Well, that's settled then," said Harry pleasantly. "Mr. Potter," said a voice, and they all turned around to see Professor McGonagall standing there. "Kindly follow me, I will escort you to your meeting in the headmaster's office." "Okay," said Harry. "Come on you lot." McGonagall looked surprised and said, "Surely there's no reason for everyone here to attend." "Actually there is," said Harry. "Malfoy and Parkinson are the ones who brought shame onto their positions, Crabbe and Goyle were assisting them, the Greengrass sisters and Miss Davis were the victims, Prefect Paddle was the one to alert me to the problem, and Professor Umbridge has kindly consented to accompany us as we inform the senior staff of this little situation." McGonagall sighed and relented. "Oh, very well. Come on, all of you." Dumbledore, Flitwick and Snape did not come out of the hall to join them, and so must have taken a different route up to the headmaster's office. McGonagall led them right up to the stone gargoyle, which leapt aside once it heard the password, "Cockroach Cluster," and let them up the spiraling staircase behind. When they reached the door, she knocked, and from within the voice of the headmaster called out, "Enter." "Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 70, ch.70. Albus Dumbledore was most put out by recent events. Things lately had not been going his way, and he was not used to that. It began back at the end of the last school term, when the Minister of Magic, one Cornelius Fudge, had outright dismissed his claims that Lord Voldemort had returned to physical form. All right, so he had offered absolutely no proof of this fact whatsoever, other than having Severus show off the dark mark tattoo on his arm, but that was beside the point. He, Albus Dumbledore, had believed it to be true, and that ought to be good enough for everybody, as Minerva had once so eloquently put it. But no. With his old buddy Lucius listed as one of those supposedly reformed Death Eaters accused of attending the Dark Lord's rebirth, Fudge had gone on the defensive, and sought to turn Dumbledore into public enemy number 1. Of course that could not do, especially when they threatened to kick Dumbledore out of his position of Chief Warlock to the Wizengamot and subject both his position as Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards and his role as headmaster at Hogwarts School to intense scrutiny. Dumbledore did not like people looking into his dealings too much. Only he, after all, had the ability to see the big picture. Only he could see how things should be done in order to attain the greater good. What others would see as being heinous crimes were actually, in the grand scheme of things, nothing more than necessary evils. Too many people would fail to understand such things, of course. They would fail to see how keeping Snape within the castle was more important than giving students a fair and decent learning environment for their potions lessons. They would fail to comprehend how imperative it was to bring the Philosopher's Stone to Hogwarts in order to lure out Voldemort. They would fail to understand why he sent Harry Potter off to live with his neglectful relatives, and why he sent him back there every summer. They would fail to understand because they had no concept of the greater good. And that failure would ultimately lead to disaster if they were allowed to go through with their plans. So Dumbledore had backtracked a little. He had withdrawn his comments about Voldemort's return, and allowed Harry to take the fall. In this way he had gotten the Ministry, the school governors and the International Confederation of Wizards to back off, allowing him to covertly reform the Order of the Phoenix without raising suspicion. Unfortunately, allowing Harry to take the fall without telling him had since backfired, and quite spectacularly so. Firstly, the boy had somehow talked his way out of his trial. And then he had simply disappeared. He did not return home to his Muggle relatives in Little Whinging. He did not go to the house of a friend. There had been absolutely no sign of him in Diagon Alley all summer long, and there wasn't even a record of him leaving the Ministry that day. Dumbledore had found several leads, but all of them turned up absolutely nothing. Worse, both Minister Fudge and Madame Bones appeared to be in the know and they weren't telling, no matter how much he insisted. Neither could be swayed by adulation of him, and neither could be intimidated by his power. It was frustrating. Then to cap it all, one of his spies within the ministry, a young Auror named Nymphadora Tonks, had gotten herself caught snooping around outside the courtroom where Harry's trial had taken place and had subsequently been kicked off of the Auror force. That had actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise, though. When the minister had attempted to crowbar his lackey Dolores Umbridge into Hogwarts using the vacant defense against the dark arts post, Dumbledore had been able to block his attempts by giving the role to Tonks. Unfortunately, this had not stopped Fudge. Somehow he had gotten Griselda Marchbanks of the Wizarding Examinations Authority to go against him and remove Professor Binns from his teaching position at the school. Not only that, they had also created legislation to guarantee that Umbridge would take over the vacant position of history professor after Binns was removed. Since then, Dumbledore had been dreading the damage that Umbridge would be able to do to his carefully laid plans, and he had worked hard to come up with a few contingencies. There was one thing, however, that he had not been prepared for. Harry Potter working for the Ministry, in a role that they apparently sponsored, was not something that he had seen coming even in his wildest speculations. For whatever reason, the Ministry had seen fit to give Harry a position of power over not only his fellow students, but also over the prefects. It was a position that was almost akin to head boy, only apparently more so. Dumbledore had, of course, planned to confront Harry as soon as he returned to the school, but this news changed things, especially as it seemed that Harry had already been exercising his newly obtained power against his enemies. He would have to tread carefully here, as he had no real grasp over the entire situation. Antagonizing Harry too much might result in more interference from the Ministry, but at the same time Harry could not be allowed too much free rein, as he had the potential to be just as damaging to Hogwarts as Umbridge. If not more so. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 71, ch.71. Harry's desired meetings with both Professor Flitwick and Professor Snape meant that both of those men were now in the headmaster's office with Dumbledore, so that all 3 meetings could be held at once. With any luck, their combined force, along with that provided by Professor McGonagall, would be enough to derail Harry in his mission without doing too much damage. A knock sounded at the door and Dumbledore put on his best grandfatherly expression before calling out, "Enter." His grandfatherly expression quickly dropped when Minerva entered his office, accompanied not only by Harry Potter, but another 8 students and the newly instated Professor Umbridge. Deciding to deal with the main problem first, he addressed the woman in pink. "Professor Umbridge, what brings you here?" "Mr. Potter requested my presence," she replied in her sickly sweet tone of voice, "to assist him the first time he deals with a head of house regarding the discipline of a prefect. Or in this case too. And what biased drivel had Potter been spouting as he attempts to victimize the students of my house?" asked Snape, his lip curled in a sneer. "I'll be the first to admit it," said Harry. "In this case there were Slytherin victims. However, it was also Slytherins who were the antagonists." He gestured towards Padma and continued, "Prefect Paddle here discovered Malfoy, Parkinson, Crabbe and Goyle behaving in an intimidating manner towards the Greengrass sisters and Miss Davies. Malfoy even went so far as to hit Davies. When Prefect Paddle went to intervene, as was her responsibility as an on-duty prefect, they behaved in a very disrespectful manner towards her. When I joined them, the 4 antagonistic Slytherins decided to take things to another level, with Parkinson getting into a physical confrontation with the other girls. Crabbe and Goyle attempted to join in while Malfoy went for his wand." "And how was the situation resolved?" questioned Professor Flitwick. "I took it upon myself to stun and bind all 4 of the antagonists, and had Prefect Paddle escort the other 3 girls to a separate compartment before rounding up a few other prefects to assist me with dealing with the remaining Slytherin students. In the end all 4 of them were escorted to separate compartments, and other prefects kindly gave up some of their personal time to stand guard over them. Snape was seething. "You cannot go around treating students in my house like that." "Actually I can," replied Harry. "They were judged to be a threat and so I coordinated the prefects in neutralizing them for the remainder of the journey. As I just explained to Malfoy down in the Great Hall, their solitary confinement was not for their punishment, but for the protection of the other students. Their punishment is what I wished to discuss with you, Professor Snape." Seeing that the man was about to bite out a verbal attack against Harry, Dumbledore cut in, asking Padma, "Would you agree with Mr. Potter's version of events, Miss Paddle?" She was obviously a bit nervous at being questioned by Professor Dumbledore directly, but Padma still managed to reply, "I would, Professor. The emotional and physical well-being of the three girls to my left was clearly at risk when I decided to intervene. I am lucky that the student advisor arrived to offer me some assistance, as it was clear that the other four had no intentions of backing down." Dumbledore studied her for a minute, his eyes twinkling slightly. Harry barely kept himself from scowling, having been warned that such a thing was a rare sign of legilimency. Although Dumbledore would find nothing in Padma's mind to contradict their version of events, Harry still made a mental note to help Padma learn the basics of occlumency. One could not be too careful after all. The headmaster took his gaze off of Padma, looked to the other three Slytherins in the room and asked, "And you? Do you three agree with this version of events?" After getting three nods in reply, he turned to Harry and asked which other prefects were involved. "Abbott, Macmillan, Chong, Hooper, Summerby, Dunstan, and Parkin," replied Harry. "The head boy was there as well. Would you like to question them?" "No," said Dumbledore. "No, that will not be necessary." He turned to the group of four. "And what of your version of events?" Neither Malfoy nor Parkinson said anything in reply. Crabbe and Goyle said nothing either, though it was debatable whether or not they would have understood the question. Harry smiled slightly. It appeared that Draco Malfoy might have actually learned his lesson. "Very well," said Dumbledore. "The four of you have served punishment enough. You may go." The four exchanged looks of glee and made to leave. Harry could barely believe what he had just heard and spoke up. "No, they may not go. As I said, their solitary confinement on the train was for the protection of the other students, not to be their punishment." "Be that as it may," said Dumbledore, "you do not have the final word on this." "Actually I do," replied Harry. He reached into his robes and pulled out the roll of parchment containing the ministerial decree that he had read out in the prefect's compartment on the train. He quickly quoted the line about being able to reprimand prefects who behaved inappropriately. "And what then do you recommend?" asked McGonagall. "Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link: p*patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 72, ch.72. I have already issued Malfoy and Parkinson with 1 strike each. Incidentally, obtaining 3 such strikes will mean that they will lose their badge. In addition to that, I recommend a loss of 20 house points each and a week of detentions assisting Hagrid in mucking out the Hippogriff paddock. Crabbe and Goyle too. Now see here, Potter, began Snape, but Umbridge cut across him. Tragic though it may be that this has happened to the children of 2 such upstanding houses, I myself and the Minister fully support this punishment. Mr. Malfoy and Miss Parkinson were caught behaving in a manner entirely unbecoming of a prefect. Serving a deserved punishment should make them think twice about such behavior in the future. Dumbledore leaned back in his chair looking thoughtful. Finally he said, "Very well. The punishment shall stand." "Headmaster, you cannot possibly allow Potter to get away with this," shouted Snape. "He's only trying to deduct as many points from Slytherin House as he possibly can." "That is enough, Severus," Dumbledore replied warningly. He turned to the 4 troublemakers. "You will be informed when you will serve your detentions. You may leave." As the group of 4 made their way towards the door, Umbridge asked, "Will you be ensuring that these 4 make it back to their dormitories safely, Professor Snape?" The man glared at her as Dumbledore said, "I'm afraid that I still require Professor Snape's presence." "Oh, are we done here?" asked Harry. If you've got a meeting with Professor Snape scheduled, then we can postpone ours and I'll meet with Professor Flitwick in his office. Professor Snape is here as a part of my meeting with you, replied Dumbledore. Didn't realize, said Harry. I was operating under the assumption that I was to have a quick meeting with two of the heads of house regarding their students before having a meeting with the headmaster and the deputy. I did not realize that you wished for the other heads of house to attend the main meeting. Perhaps someone ought to go and find Professor Sprout. That will not be necessary, began Dumbledore before Harry cut him off. Why? If Professor Snape's presence is required in our meeting, and I can think of no reason for him to be other than his role as head of Slytherin House, then logic dictates that Professor Sprout must be here too. And, of course, that Professor Flitwick should remain after I have discussed Prefect Paddle with him. Dumbledore regarded him with a piercing gaze. Harry saw the familiar twinkle in the man's eyes and made sure that his occlumency shields were up. He would not have been able to block out Dumbledore if the man had done a proper attempt at reading his mind, but a surface skin like Dumbledore was doing now was easily deflected by his shields. Finally Dumbledore seemed to relent. He turned away from Harry and asked, "Would you escort these three as well, Professor Snape?" He was referring, of course, to Daphne, Astoria and Tracy. "Oh, they won't be going back to their dormitories tonight," said Harry. "All three will need to visit the hospital wing following the fighting. Prefect Paddle can escort them there after the two of us have talked with Professor Flitwick." Professor Snape glared at him but wisely decided to do no more than that. He gave a stiff but courteous nod to Dumbledore before following the four trouble-making Slytherins out of the room. Harry had expected a lot more arguing to occur, but then Draco had probably realized that he was not going to get much sympathy from anyone other than Snape or Pansy. He would probably begin penning a letter to his father the moment he got back to the Slytherin common room. To be honest, his dealing with Professor Snape had gone better than he had ever hoped. It seemed that Dumbledore's insistence at a meeting had a silver lining to it, resulting in Snape keeping himself in better check than normal. The presence of Professor Umbridge probably helped too. As the door closed behind Snape, Professor Flitwick spoke up. "What is it that you desired to speak to me about, Mr. Potter?" "It was just to inform you that Prefect Paddle here has been awarded a merit," replied Harry. "Her behavior on the train today was exemplary, and she is a credit to her, not only those of her position but also her house and the school as a whole. A merit does of course come with 20 house points." "Splendid," said Professor Flitwick with a chuckle. "I can see that I made the correct choice in giving you that badge, Miss Paddle, unlike others." "Thank you," replied Padma. She, like Harry, was thinking that Professor Flitwick might not have been referring solely to Snape's choice of Malfoy and Parkinson for prefect status. Flitwick hopped down from his seat and said, "If that is all, Mr. Potter, I shall assist Miss Paddle in escorting these three young ladies to the hospital wing before ensuring that she herself returns to Ravenclaw Tower safely." "Thank you for your time, Professor Flitwick," said Harry politely. "Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 73, ch.73. They all watched as the vertically challenged charms professor escorted the 4 students out of the headmaster's office. Then it was just the 4 of them. Harry and Umbridge on one side, Dumbledore and McGonagall on the other. "This won't take long, Professor Umbridge," said Dumbledore. "There is no reason for you to stay." "Nor is there any reason for Professor McGonagall to stay," replied Umbridge. The Transfiguration Professor drew herself up and replied, "I am here because Mr. Potter is a member of my house." "Actually I'm not," replied Harry. "Remember? I just announced it in the Great Hall when the feast ended." McGonagall glared at him before responding, "Then I am here as the deputy headmistress. And Professor Umbridge is here to make sure that you fully comprehend the Ministry's position on this matter," replied Harry. "Very well," said Dumbledore wearily. "Harry, why did you feel it necessary to claim your new position?" I already explained that down in the Great Hall, replied Harry. There have been too many prefects in the past that either did not bother doing their job or abused their position. I intend to weed them out and take any actions against them that are necessary. At the same time I will help the good prefects where I can, and assist my fellow students where required. You do not need to do this, Harry, said Dumbledore. If there are problems with the prefects, or any other student, then the teachers are there to handle them. That's what they are there for. You're right, said Harry, that is what they are there for. Unfortunately I have 4 years' worth of evidence that proves that the teachers do not do that job. And most of that evidence centers on the 4 students that Professor Snape just escorted out of the room, as well as Professor Snape himself, of course. Professor Snape has my complete trust, Dumbledore began, but Harry cut him off. That may be good enough for you, Headmaster, but it isn't for me. Nor for the Ministry, added Umbridge. There have been more complaints about that man registered with the Wizarding Examinations Authority than all your other current members of staff combined, and most of them have been here for a lot longer than Severus Snape has. Certain staff and pupils have been allowed far too much free rein, Professor, said Harry, and other members of staff have left a lot to be desired in helping the other students deal with these issues. That is why I have my new role, to help those who no longer feel that they can go to the teachers with their problems. If students do not come to us, then we cannot be expected to help them, said McGonagall. There are reasons that they do not come to you, replied Harry. They need someone, Professor, and in my time here I have time and again been shown that going to a teacher proves to be nothing more than fruitless. Seeing that McGonagall had no answer to that, Dumbledore tried to change his approach by asking a different question. Why do you feel that the Ministry saw fit to give this position to you specifically, Harry? Mr. Potter was chosen because the Ministry believes him to be the best candidate available for the job, said Umbridge, answering for Harry, and it was he, after all, who brought the need for such a role as the one he now has to the attention of the Ministry. We also believe that, through his excellent performance when he represented this school in the Triwizard Tournament, he has shown himself to be an exemplary student that others should be able to respect. I will not stand for the Ministry using a student in my care for their own purposes, said Dumbledore. But I'm not, said Harry. I get paid a salary for my role. How much are you being paid? Asked McGonagall. That is between me and the Ministry, replied Harry, as it is they, and not the school, that pays me. And of course this role will look good when I eventually apply for a full-time job after I finish school. And how do you plan to fit these new responsibilities around your studies? Asked Dumbledore. Well, the prefects and head boy and girl seem to manage all right, said Harry. Of course I won't be having to attend Quidditch practices, so that frees up more time. Oh, and I will be dropping divination class altogether. You cannot drop classes during your 5th year, Harry, said Dumbledore, warningly. We've already approved it with Madame Marchbanks of the Wizarding Examinations Authority, said Umbridge. Any student can opt out of one of the optional subjects in favor of a work-based course that will potentially lead to a job offer, you know that, Dumbledore. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, p*patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 74, ch.74. Harry could tell by the look on the man's face that he did know this. It was an interesting fact that Harry had not been informed of this when he was choosing which extra classes to take for his OWL years. He would have liked to have pursued one of the alternate courses a long time ago, and would have dropped divination in favor of one the moment he knew that such things were available. Hannah actually went to work with her mother for a few hours every week, building up a few basic skills that were required to become a healer. Susan took a class provided by the DMLE at the Ministry studying law. And they told him that their fellow Hufflepuff Ernie Macmillan would go and work in his dad's office at the family's ink production factory, aiming to one day take over the family business. Harry had never noticed until this was mentioned, but most of the ink pots he purchased for school use had a small bit of writing beneath the logo on the label that read "Manufactured by Macmillan and Sons." EST 1655. Harry had somehow been completely denied the opportunity to do such things and wasn't very happy about it. As the majority of these extra classes occurred outside of the school, he supposed that this was just more evidence of Dumbledore attempting to keep him under his thumb. Apparently Dumbledore did not like the direction that the course of the conversation had switched to and so made an attempt to change it. Where did you go this summer, Harry? Harry stood up from his seat and replied, I am afraid that information is no concern of yours, Headmaster. I am your magical guardian, responded Dumbledore. It is my right to know what happened to you during the time you were missing. I was not missing, replied Harry, nor was I ever officially reported as such. I informed the Ministry of my new location and received their approval. And they were the only ones who needed to know. And before Dumbledore could say anything more, Harry turned and left, Umbridge following him after offering good night. Albus, Minerva. Neither said anything to her in response. Once the door was shut, McGonagall turned to Dumbledore and asked, why did you just let him leave? Dumbledore took off his glass and rubbed the bridge of his nose before replying, we would have gained nothing more out of him tonight. That boy can be very stubborn when he wants to be, and now he has the Ministry's backing. How bad is our situation now? I honestly cannot say, Minerva. Harry clearly is not happy with us and is convinced that the staff cannot handle bullying students effectively. I've warned you time and again that allowing Severus so much freedom to rule Slytherin House as he sees fit would only come back to bite us. I trust Severus' judgment, Minerva, and I ask that you do too. It's as had to trust that man's judgment when he chose two of the biggest bullies in that year group to be prefects. What were you thinking when you approved them for the role? I was hoping that by having responsibility thrust upon them that they would respond appropriately and grow up. That, as I recall, is the same thing that you and I both hoped to achieve by appointing Ronald Weasley to the same position. I would say that by implementing a 3 strikes plan, all 3 of those students may be stripped of those badges before they can learn their lessons. Or it may help them learn it quicker, offered McGonagall with a touch of hope in her voice. Perhaps, replied Dumbledore. He gave a weary sigh and said, we knew that there was going to be a storm coming from the Ministry, but I never suspected that Harry Potter would be on their side for it. Well, what did you expect, abandoning him like that? Demanded McGonagall, who knows what he was thinking all those days he spent alone at his Muggle relative's house. You betrayed his trust, Albus. We all did. Dumbledore rubbed a hand over his face and heaved another sigh. This was going to be a long school year. When I arrived here earlier this afternoon, I took the liberty of talking to a few house elves and having them organize an office and private quarters for you, Mr. Potter, as per the minister's request, said Professor Umbridge as the two made their way along the corridor that led away from the headmaster's office. They chose one that is situated close to the approximate halfway point between all 4 house common rooms, ensuring that it will be easy to find for any student that needs you. Thank you, said Harry politely. Once I receive my class schedule tomorrow at breakfast, I will be able to organize a timetable for when I can meet with students. Oh, and thank you for assisting me back there. I think your presence really helped in getting Snape to hold his tongue. You mean he's usually worse than that? Asked Umbridge, sounding surprised. Much worse, replied Harry, especially when I'm around. And Dumbledore just lets him get away with it. Oh yes. I mean, they can't control students who bully, so why would a bullying teacher be handled any better? I'll have to keep a close eye on him then. You should. By rights, Potions has the potential to be one of the most enjoyable classes at this school. Instead, it is one of the most dreaded, and that is purely due to the fact that it is Snape who teaches it. By now their path had led them to the corridor in which Harry's new office and sleeping quarters were located. The door was situated behind a suit of armor. Professor Umbridge instructed him that he only had to inform the suit of armor of what his password would be and the door would be opened. Harry waited for her to leave before turning to the suit of armor and stating, the password is Liberation. The suit of armor nodded its head in understanding before stepping to the side and opening the door for Harry, who stepped through and found a small yet cozy office located within, complete with his own desk. It was late though, so, deciding that he would have a look around in the morning, he made his way over to the door that was located on the opposite side of the room. Beyond he found a small sitting room, complete with a fireplace, a sofa, and 2 comfy-looking armchairs. But it was in the next room that he found what he was looking for, a large and comfortable-looking bed. Harry reached into the pocket on the inside of his robes and pulled out the sample of treacle tart that he had taken from the Great Hall earlier. "Tippy," he called out into the darkness of the room. With a faint pop, Tippy the house elf appeared. She belonged to the Bones family and had been the one that usually cleaned Harry's room when he stayed at their house during the summer. Madame Bones had arranged it so that Tippy could travel to Harry at Hogwarts if he had need of her. "Yes, young sir?" she asked him. Harry held out the package and said, "Please take this to Madame Bones. It needs testing for a suspicious potion." "Right away, sir," said Tippy with a bow before popping away. With that last job for the day done, Harry stretched and turned towards the bed. Deciding to let his inner child out to play, Harry took a running jump and landed spread-eagled on top of the bed, the soft mattress easily cushioning his landing. "Well," he thought as he lay there, "that's day 1 over with." And with that thought, he fell into a deep and peaceful sleep, on top of the bed and still fully clothed. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 75, ch.75. Harry cursed himself when he awoke the next morning. Weary from the previous day's events, he had stumbled through his quarters and to his bedroom, where he fell asleep on top of his bed without giving a thought to doing even the briefest of check of the rooms for any unsavory spell work. Madame Bones would be so disappointed in him. Before he could even think of taking a shower, Harry whipped out his wand and cast every detection spell he knew over every object and in every nook and cranny his new rooms held. Fortunately, the spells turned up nothing, so it seemed that Dolores Umbridge had been able to arrange for the house elves to set up these rooms for Harry without Dumbledore getting wind of it. If he had, it was likely that everything from the pillows on the bed to the toilet seat would be enchanted with some kind of monitoring spell. After having a quick shower and getting dressed, Harry fed Hedwig a few owl treats before picking up his school bag and heading towards the door. As he walked, he opened the front compartment of his bag to check that he had a full stock of quills, ink, and parchment. It turned out that he had plenty of each in supply, as well as all of the textbooks for his chosen subjects. However, also contained within that compartment was something altogether unexpected. 4 wands. It seemed that, as well as forgetting to check his quarters for spells, he had also forgotten to give Draco and his cronies their wands back the night before. Well, a night without their wands should probably cause them all to respect what a privilege it was to have them in the first place. Note, should. Whether they did or did not, Snape was guaranteed to be on the warpath at breakfast. Deciding to deal with that problem when it reared its greasy head, Harry zipped up his bag and then opened the door to exit his rooms. The suit of armor beyond stepped aside in order to allow him to pass out into the corridor and then resumed its spot in front of the door. For the briefest second, Harry felt a mild surge of panic. He knew that he had set the password to get into his quarters the night before, but for a brief moment he could not remember what he had chosen it to be. Then it came to him, liberation. As he began walking along the corridor, he repeated the word many times over in his head in order to make sure that he remembered it. Unfortunately, he was so engrossed in this that he literally walked into someone. Fortunately, the other person was quite a bit smaller than him, so he was not knocked over. For the girl he had walked into, however, it was a different matter. Only the fact that she had 2 fellow students behind her stopped her from toppling over backwards and landing flat on her back on the cold stone floor. "Hey, sorry about that," said Harry as the 2 girls pushed the other back onto her feet. "S okay," the first girl squeaked in embarrassment. Harry noticed immediately that they were each wearing the ties and badges of Ravenclaw House, and all 3 appeared to be first years. "So, where are you headed?" he asked, hoping to be helpful. To breakfast, muttered one of the girls. But we got lost, said the third. Well, the bad news is that you are going in completely the wrong direction, said Harry, but the good news is that I am heading to breakfast as well, so why don't you follow me? All three girls nodded and followed him as he set off towards the Great Hall. So how come you didn't go down to breakfast with some of the other students? Harry asked in an effort to make conversation as they walked along. We were following some second years, but stopped to look at a portrait of children flying kites in a field, explained one of the girls. When we turned to carry on, the second years were gone. Harry thought about that for a moment, and could not recall ever seeing a portrait of children flying kites, but then again he had never had any cause to go near Ravenclaw Tower, so any portraits located near there were not ones he would have come across. Then again, it had also been some time since he had bothered to study any of the portraits in the castle. The one they had described could well have been a new one, and he had just never noticed it. Well, don't worry, he said, most people get lost at some point during their first few weeks here. But before you know it, you'll be able to make your way down to the Great Hall or to your classrooms with your eyes closed. Is there a spell for that? Asked one of the girls, eagerly. Said Harry thoughtfully. No, not that I know of. Oh, there you three are, exclaimed a voice from behind them. Harry and the girls turned around to see Padma Patil hurrying towards them. Hey, Padma, said Harry, what brings you here? I was looking for these three, replied Padma. All the other first years arrived with some of the second years. When these three didn't turn up, I decided to go looking for them. Harry turned to the three girls and asked, see that? She came looking for you. That's someone you can trust right there, so never be afraid to talk to her, okay? All three girls nodded. For that matter, Harry continued, you can always come and talk to me. Okay, squeaked one of the girls, whilst the other two looked too embarrassed to do anything more than nod with their eyes fixed firmly on the floor. Padma rolled her eyes at their behavior and said, come on, let's go. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60 plus premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 76, ch.76. As they walked, Padma asked of Harry, so, any plans to sit at the Ravenclaw table this morning? Actually, I was planning on sitting with the Hufflepuffs for breakfast and Ravenclaws for lunch, answered Harry, but if you really wanted me to, I suppose that I could switch up the order of things. No, said Padma, lunch will be fine. I'll save you a seat. But does this mean that you'll be having dinner with the Slytherins? Looks that way, said Harry before trailing off unsurely. I'll arrange for the coffin to be delivered tomorrow morning, said Padma. Do you like yew or are you a mahogany person? I'd prefer a pine if you can get it, replied Harry, keeping up the joke. I rather like the smell, and it is a much more eco-friendly option. Noted. Seriously though, how do you plan on surviving sitting with the Slytherins? Well, hopefully I can sit next to Tracy Davis or one of the Greengrass sisters, so at least one side of me should be safe. From then on the plan is to keep my wand in my hand and touch nothing. Sounds like a reasonable idea, replied Padma. She was silent for a few moments, apparently lost in thought. Then she asked, so if you do survive dinner with the Slytherins, I was wondering if maybe you wanted to hang out later. Harry paused at that. He looked to the girls and said, if you go down that staircase, the Great Hall is on your right. All three hurried off down the stairs. Harry turned to Padma and asked, do you mean like a date or something? If you want, she replied, sounding suddenly unsure of herself. I'd like that, said Harry, and was rewarded with a bright smile. Really? She asked. Yeah. What did you have in mind? Her lips moved slightly as she tried to find an answer, but finally wincing and replying, you know what? I concentrated so hard on working up the courage to ask you on a date that I didn't stop to think up something for us to actually do on the date. Harry chuckled and said, well, I guess Hogsmeade is out of the question. Tell you what, I'm the guy here. You did the asking, so let me plan what we do. A smile formed on her face as she replied okay. Let me know at lunch. Sure thing, said Harry as she turned and walked down the remaining flight of stairs. Just before she disappeared into the great hall she glanced back at him over her shoulder and smiled before disappearing from view. Harry remained standing at the top of the stairs, a smile of his own on his face. He had a date. Not only that, he had a date with a witch who was considered by many of his classmates to be one of the prettiest girls in their year. Not only that, she was kind, thoughtful and intelligent person to boot. It didn't get much better than that. Suck on that everyone who ever thought I might be gay, he thought as he finally began to make his way down the stairs. The timing of the date was set for after dinner, so all he had to do now was plan what they were actually going to do on their date. He stopped walking. Holy hell, I have to plan a date, he thought in a panic. He didn't have the first clue how to do that. All right, he wasn't completely clueless. He knew that the basic formula for a date with a girl was dinner and either a movie or dancing. But that was in the Muggle world. He was at Hogwarts. They didn't show movies at Hogwarts. Opportunities to go dancing at Hogwarts were very few and far between. And unless you felt like sneaking into the kitchens to pay a visit to the house elves, dinner at Hogwarts was only available in the Great Hall. His mind whirled about as thoughts raced through his head at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Aside from a stroll through Hogsmeade Village when the staff allowed it, what could possibly constitute a date for two students at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry? As he resumed his walk towards the Great Hall, he thought about older students whom he had seen dating each other. He didn't make a habit of studying them, but sometimes they were hard to ignore. For the most part, dates at Hogwarts seemed to consist of finding a secluded spot in an alcove or in the shade of a tree in order to snog for a bit until a teacher or prefect, or Peeves, found you. As fun as snogging Padma sounded, Harry doubted that that was all she would want out of a first date. For that matter, he didn't even know if Padma would be up for snogging him at all on their first date. Somehow she didn't seem to be that type of girl. Some days in the warmer months couples could be seen sitting on the grassy lawns watching the world go by together. Did that constitute a proper date? Harry wondered if he ought to work on an attempt to increase the number of Hogsmeade trips per year. Seriously, so long as they all did their homework, what was wrong with the students being allowed to wander down to the village on any Saturday of the year? They all needed to regularly top up their school supplies after all, as well as buy treats for pets amongst other things. It seemed strange that they could only do that on 3 set days in the year, and the rest of the time they had to settle for ordering their supplies through Owl Post, which was rather inefficient as it took so long. He must have entered the Great Hall without realizing, for he was suddenly pulled unpleasantly from his train of thought by a shout. Potter! Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 77, ch.77. Harry blinked and the world came back into focus. He was literally standing just in the dead center of the frame of the double doors to the Great Hall. The eyes of all the students at the 4 house tables, as well as all of those belonging to the people seated at the staff table, were on him as Severus Snape stormed along the aisle between the Gryffindor and Ravenclaw tables, heading straight towards Harry. His black robes billowed about in that style that only he seemed to have perfected, and yet, as always, his long and greasy hair barely moved an inch. Obviously it had been Snape who had shouted his name at him. It seemed that the man wanted as many witnesses for this event as possible. Fine by me, thought Harry before asking, "How may I help you, Professor Snape?" "Don't play dumb with me, you insolent little whelp," sneered the school's resident potions master. "Malfoy has informed me that you stole his wand as well as those of his friends. Now hand them over." "I stole nothing," replied Harry calmly. Those wands were confiscated from the students in question as their behavior on the Hogwarts Express warranted it. I held on to the wands for the night in order to teach those four a lesson in humility, however I had every intention of giving them back to their owners this morning so as to not interfere with their lessons. A likely story, scoffed Snape. Admit it. You were hoping that they would be unable to perform magic in class and so lose plenty of house points, weren't you? I am afraid that you could not be more wrong, Professor, said Harry. Is that so? The man asked with a dangerous edge to his voice. Well then, let's see how you like this. 200 points from Gryffindor for wand theft. He smirked at Harry and said, well, that should mean that the Gryffindors will be in the minus figures until after the Christmas holidays at the very least. Again you are incorrect, Professor, said Harry. As I said during my speech last night, my new role requires me to be entirely neutral. Therefore I am no longer of any of the school houses, Gryffindor or otherwise. And yet you still wear the colors of Gryffindor House, replied Snape with a sneer. Harry looked down and saw that he was right. Oh, so I am. My mistake. And with that, he took out his wand and tapped the badge on the front of his robes, causing the image of the Gryffindor lion to shrink back into just 1/4 of the available space. The remaining 3/4 of the space was filled by the Eagle of Ravenclaw, the Badger of Hufflepuff and the Serpent of Slytherin. Then a big H appeared, meaning that his robes now bore the emblem of Hogwarts School itself, rather than one of its individual houses. This was followed by a tap of the wand to his tie, which caused the red and gold stripes on it to narrow and for some to change colors so that there were 8 different colors: red and gold for Gryffindor, blue and bronze for Ravenclaw, yellow and black for Hufflepuff and green and silver for Slytherin. Then finally one tap to the collar of his robes saw the silk lining that for Gryffindors was a dark red turn into the black color that the lining originally was when first purchased. There, said Harry as he pocketed his wand. I trust that you find this change satisfactory, Professor. There was a vein throbbing in Snape's forehead now. Harry had seen that phenomenon in the man on several occasions over the past few years, but the only time it had ever been this severe looking had been at the end of his 3rd year when Sirius Black evaded the Dementor's kiss and Snape was convinced that Harry was somehow involved, which he was, but Snape had no way to prove that. Of course, Harry realized that it was taking Snape every ounce of self-control he had to stop himself from exploding right there in the Great Hall. This meant that there were only a few seconds more to go before Snape either hexed him or had a stroke. Therefore Harry decided to end their conversation there and then by stepping around the man and striding towards the front of the hall. He stood before the staff table and turned to face the students before asking, could Draco Malfoy, Pansy Parkinson, Vincent Crabbe, and Gregory Goyle of Slytherin House please come up here? 2 of the 4 students in question exchanged looks with each other and several of their housemates before getting to their feet. The other 2 simply waited to see what the first 2 would tell them to do. All 4 of them then walked to the front of the hall. The behavior exhibited by the 4 of you on the train yesterday was appalling, said Harry. Can I trust that you will not behave like that again? Showing that they had at least some brain cells rattling around in their self-important heads, both Draco and Pansy nodded in reply. Crabbe and Goyle mirrored them, even if they did not entirely understand the question asked. Very well, said Harry before swinging his backpack off of his shoulder and opening it up to retrieve the 4 wands. He held them out to the 4 Slytherins, each of whom took their own before slinking back to their house table. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, p*patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 78, ch.78. Harry stepped away from the staff table and headed towards the Hufflepuffs. On the way he noticed that Snape was still standing between the Ravenclaw and Gryffindor house tables. He called out, "Was there something else you wanted, Professor?" In response Snape gave Harry his trademark sneer before turning and sweeping out of the hall, robes billowing around him once again. Harry shook his head and continued to the Hufflepuff table. Every eye followed him. Hannah shoved Megan Jones to get the girl to budge over before patting the now vacated spot next to her. "Thanks, Hannah," said Harry before sitting down. "Good morning, Hufflepuffs." "Good morning, Harry," chirped Hannah brightly. "So, care to tell me what the show at lunch will be?" "Show?" questioned Harry. "What show?" "Well, last night there was the big 'I'm here to help you' monologue, and this morning you and Snape gave us double-act performance following by some award-winning performances by the Slytherins. Seriously, Pansy ought to win a BAFTA for how well she acted the part of sad-looking witch. And after all that, I want to know what kind of act we can be seeing at lunch." "Hate to tell you this, but none of that this morning was planned," replied Harry. "And how to know about the BAFTAs, anyway?" "Oh, so that was all improv. Nice," said Hannah. "And just because I'm from a noble and ancient house does not mean I am a pleb. Muggleborn mother, remember?" "Right, gotcha," said Harry before looking across the table. "Morning, Susan, how are you?" Susan glared right back at him, though the effect was dampened by the fact that she was obviously sulking about something. "Oh, don't be like that, Sue, Harry doesn't know yet," said Hannah. "What don't I know?" asked Harry. Hannah leaned in and said in a staged whisper so that everyone within 20 feet heard her, "Eddie Carmichael went and got himself a girlfriend during the summer." Harry turned to look over his shoulder to look at the Ravenclaw table. He had to raise himself out of his seat a little in order to look over the heads of the Gryffindors seated at their table. Sure enough, Eddie Carmichael was sitting there, trying to remove some girl's appendix via her mouth with his tongue. Cho Chang and her friend Marietta Edgecombe seemed to be trying to give the amorous pair as much room as possible. "Oh yeah," he mumbled, feeling more than a little bit grossed out by the overly public display of affection. "Stupid trollop," growled Susan. "Oh, come on, Susan," said Hannah. "In all the years you've fancied him, how many times have you actually talked to him?" "I was gonna let him know that I liked him eventually," grumbled Susan. "Stupid prat, could have waited until I was ready." "Yeah, well, you'll just have to find someone else to pine after," said Hannah. "How about Harry?" Susan flushed scarlet, but Harry didn't notice as he was paying attention to the results of the spells he was using to test the food around him. He did, however, register Hannah's comment and replied with an absent-minded "She can't. I'm taken too." Around him several conversations stopped, causing him to look up and glance around. Then he leaned towards Hannah and asked, "I said that too loud, didn't I?" "Yup," she replied with a grin. "Now spill it, Potter." Harry was saved from further embarrassment by the arrival of Professor McGonagall, who asked, "Mr. Potter, why are you not seated with the Gryffindors?" "Seriously?" Harry asked. "After that performance with Snape just now, I have to explain it again." McGonagall's lips thinned and her nostrils flared, two major signs that she was angry. However, she refrained from commenting and instead said, "No, Mr. Potter, you have made yourself quite clear. I just came over to deliver your weekly timetable. As we were unaware of your change in plans, you are still down for taking all of your classes with Gryffindor students. I have, however, taken the liberty of removing divination from your timetable. I expect you to use those vacant periods wisely." "Thank you, Professor," Harry replied, taking the timetable from her. "And don't worry. I plan on using those free periods to do as much of my homework as possible, therefore allowing me more time after classes and on weekends to do my duties as student advisor." "Very well," she said. "Let me know if you require any assistance in your duties." With that, she turned and headed back to the Gryffindor table. "I'll keep that in mind," muttered Harry as he tried to remember McGonagall ever offering him assistance in anything before. "Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 79, ch.79. After realizing that she had not done such a thing before, and therefore coming to the conclusion that she must have offered on Dumbledore's orders, Harry glanced down at the timetable in his hand. He had a day that was mostly double periods ahead of him, Double history of magic, followed by break, then double potions, lunch, a homework period due to his dropping of divination, and then to round the day off nicely, he had a double period of defense against the dark arts before dinner. Both of the new teachers plus the greasy git all on the first day back at school. What joy! Hannah leaned in over his shoulder and let out a whistle before commenting, "Wow! Don't you have a fun day ahead of you?" "Someone out there must hate me," he replied. "I always seem to end up with at least one potions lesson on the first day back." "What have you got?" "Dunno," replied Hannah. "Professor Sprout hasn't been along with our timetables yet. Anyway, that's enough talk about lessons." Before McGonagall rudely interrupted us, "You let slip a juicy bit of information about being taken. Now explain." Harry sighed and replied, "All right, well, I guess I'm not really taken so much as, well, look, I just arranged to meet up with Padma after dinner, that's all." "As in a date?" asked Susan. "Yes, Susan," replied Harry. "A date. Padma and I are going on a date." "A date where?" asked Hannah. "I don't know yet. I have to plan that part, but so far the best that I have been able to come up with has been a stroll around the lake." "That's actually not a bad way to go if you two are just testing the waters, so to speak," commented Hannah. "Just don't get so tongue-tied around her that you can't talk to her. That'll make things go really slowly." "I don't normally get tongue-tied around Padma," replied Harry, "and I don't plan on starting now. But is taking her on a walk around the lake good enough for a first date?" Susan leaned across the table and said in a low voice, "You could always call on Tippy and ask if she'll sort you out with a picnic basket." Harry nodded his head thoughtfully. A walk around the lake in the evening sun with a break part of the way around for a little picnic sounded like an acceptable first date, especially given his limited options inside the castle and its grounds. If only there was a magical room that could transform itself into anything you wanted. All conversation about Harry's upcoming date came to a stop when, with a screech, the first of the many owls that brought the morning's post flew into the great hall, followed by whole parliament of others. The owls swooped down low over the 5 long tables and began landing in front of the intended recipients of their deliveries. A tawny owl landed in front of Harry and held out its leg to him in order to allow him to untie the day's copy of the Daily Prophet from it. Harry took the paper and deposited a single bronze nut coin into the pouch on the owl's other leg. The bird then flew off as Harry unfurled the newspaper. There on the front page, staring back at him, was Harry himself. He was standing to the immediate left of the Minister for Magic, with both Dolores Umbridge and Griselda Marchbanks standing on the minister's right-hand side. The headline read Education Reform Latest, and below that a subheading read Ministry has full support and cooperation of Harry Potter, the boy who lived. "Well, would you look at that," asked Hannah, "and there was me thinking that the show for breakfast was over. Now it turns out that your little sparring session with Snape was just the opening act." "What can I say?" joked Harry. "I like to keep my fans entertained." "Don't look now, but Dumbledore seems a little pissed," said Susan. "I'm not surprised," commented Ernie Macmillan from her left before quoting aloud from the text. "During my time at Hogwarts I have been assured that the castle is a safe place to be. Unfortunately, I myself have had several experiences that have shown that to not be the case, not least of which was my name ending up in the Goblet of Fire at the start of the Triwizard Tournament last year." "How about this?" asked Megan Jones, and she quoted, "The staff at Hogwarts do not seem to be subjected to any form of review, and this, in my experience, seems to have led to some of the staff behaving in an unprofessional manner. This attitude has, of course, led to a certain degree of distrust amongst the students for the staff." "Tell me if you find something that isn't true," said Harry. "I agree with every word, Harry," said Ernie. "Same here," agreed Megan. "Mr. Potter. He hadn't even had his first class yet, and that was the 3rd time that morning that a teacher had come over and addressed him." "Yes, Professor McGonagall?" asked Harry, turning in his seat to face her. "The headmaster would like to see you in his office," she answered now. Harry gave a weary sigh before getting to his feet. "Fine, but this had better not make me late for class." The stony-faced Transfiguration professor said nothing in reply. Instead she turned with a swish of tartan and led the way out of the great hall, Harry following along behind after telling the Hufflepuffs that he would see them later. Summoned to the headmaster's office twice before the first class starts, commented Susan as she and the others watched him go. That boy must have just set a new record. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 80, ch.80. Somewhere near Whitehall in London, there stood what appeared to be a normal red telephone box. People for miles around knew that the thing didn't work and so paid it no mind. Inside that telephone box there was a small, ragged-looking rat, lying curled up in one of the corners hoping to avoid detection. That rat was Peter Pettigrew in his animagus form. After several days, his master had finally come around from whatever ailment it was that had temporarily affected him. After sufficiently punishing the healers and several Death Eaters, including Pettigrew, for failing to find a cure so that he could have healed sooner, the Dark Lord had turned his mind to other things. In the lead-up to the events of that fateful Halloween night of 1981, various different things had occurred which had led Lord Voldemort to the doorstep of the Potter family home. One of them was the report of a prophecy, delivered to him by one of the newer recruits. The prophecy had not been completely heard by the Death Eater, but it had been enough to force Voldemort's hand. Now, once again resurrected, Lord Voldemort desired to know exactly what it was that the prophecy contained that the eavesdropping Death Eater had missed. And that was why Peter Pettigrew was currently hiding in his animagus form in a red telephone box, for that telephone box was, of course, the visitor's entrance to the Ministry of Magic building, and was Pettigrew's best chance of getting inside unnoticed. In the form of a rat, Pettigrew was unable to check his watch. However, he was reasonably sure that the main workforce would have begun arriving around an hour ago. All he had to do was wait for someone to come along and use the visitor's entrance, thus allowing him access to the building whilst remaining undetected. Well, that was the plan, anyway. Suddenly he heard footsteps coming nearer. Then the door to the telephone box opened. Pettigrew was in luck. The man who entered the phone box had a short conversation with the machine, and then the box began to sink down into the bowels of the ministry. He was in. "This could be very damaging to the school, Harry," said Dumbledore as he leaned over his desk to study Harry. A copy of today's Daily Prophet was sitting on top of the desk. "I disagree," replied Harry, calmly. "Every word that I said is true, from the issues with the staff to the bullying students to the safety concerns regarding the school as a whole. Nothing that I said in that interview was misconstrued in any way." "Nevertheless," said Dumbledore, "this school has an image to maintain, and I will not have a student, any student, besmirching that image in the media. Perhaps it's time that this school maintained its image by actually living up to it for once," Harry retorted. "Perhaps it's time that the people running this place looked at their problems and tackled them head-on rather than burying it all under the nearest rug and then pretending that everything is all hunky-dory." "Harry, you are young," said Dumbledore. "I do not expect you to understand." "You're right," said Harry. "I don't understand. So perhaps you could try explaining it to me. Perhaps you could try explaining why it is more important to maintain a facade rather than deal with the school's problems. Perhaps you could try explaining why it is more important to keep irresponsible, incompetent, and/or vindictive staff in the castle than it is to ensure that your students receive their education in a pleasant, safe and nurturing environment." "Harry." Dumbledore tried to speak in a placating tone. "Didn't think so," said Harry, getting up out of the chair he had been sitting in. "Let me say this now, Headmaster, just so that we are absolutely clear on the matter. You may long ago have stopped caring about the health and well-being, both mental and physical, of those who come to this castle in order to receive an education, but I do care. I will do all that I can to help them, and to protect them from ineptness and your total disregard for them, and if I had to make a deal with the Ministry of Magic, and give interviews for the Daily Prophet in order to achieve that, then so be it. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a lesson to be getting to. And with that he left the office, leaving a deflated Dumbledore sitting behind his desk. Is it true, Minerva, he asked of Professor McGonagall, have I really allowed things to fall so far as all that? There certainly are one or two areas where both you and the school in a whole could do with improving upon, McGonagall replied, but I don't think that things are quite as bleak as Mr. Potter paints them. Dumbledore gave a tired sigh and commented, I suppose you are right, Minerva. I just hope that all of this doesn't come back to cause us problems later. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 81, ch.81. Dumbledore's demanding of a meeting with him meant that Harry arrived in the corridor outside the History of Magic classroom just in time to see the last of his classmates entering the room. He hurried forwards and caught the door just before it snapped shut and slid inside. It appeared that they were sharing this class with the Hufflepuffs. Susan and Hannah waved at him from their table to the right. Harry waved back and then scanned the room for a vacant seat. Professor Umbridge was sitting at her desk, sorting through a pile of parchment. It quickly became apparent to Harry that there was only one vacant seat available. It was the seat that he had occupied for this class in every year previous, the one on Hermione's left. Ron was seated with Neville on the next table over. Harry gave a weary sigh and made his way over. With Ron on his left and Hermione on his right, this may just prove to be a trying double period. Hermione looked up in surprise when he dumped his book bag onto the table next to her and looked like she wanted to say something as he pulled out the chair, but she refrained from opening her mouth. Ron, however, showed no such restraint. The moment Harry was seated, the red-haired boy said, with a wide grin on his face that was awesome at breakfast, Harry. First tell off Snape, then you got to punish Malfoy and humiliate him in front of everyone in the middle of the Great Hall. Without looking at him, Harry replied, I was just doing my job, Ron. Malfoy and his friends behaved in such a way that warranted their being punished, and I did so. At no point did I intend to humiliate them in front of the entire school, however Professor Snape forced the issue. He also acted out of line, and I merely called him on it. I still reckon it was wicked, said Ron, who clearly still thought that he and Harry were friends. Apparently things like that took their time to sink in through the Pratt's thick skull. Harry was pulling out his textbook for the class out of his bag when he became aware that Hermione was watching him. He turned to look at her and she turned away, her feeling of awkwardness clearly showing on her face. Harry decided to just simply ignore the pair of them as he fished out some parchment from his bag. Hem. Silence filled the classroom as every student broke off their respective conversations in order to direct their full attention to the source of this strange noise. Professor Umbridge was now standing up behind her desk, apparently ready to begin their class. Well, good morning class, she said in that patronizingly girlish voice she had used the previous evening during her speech. A few of the class mumbled good morning in reply, with Harry's response being the clearest. Oh, tut, said Professor Umbridge, that won't do at all now, will it? I would like you, please, to reply good morning, Professor Umbridge. Now, one more time, please. Good morning class. Good morning Professor Umbridge, the parroted back in unison. There, she said in her most simpering voice that wasn't too difficult now, was it? Harry winced. She was patronizing them again. Now then, she continued, for our first lesson together, it has been decided that we shall start things off with a little pop quiz, so to speak. An ominous feeling of dread spread through most of the students in the classroom as Professor Umbridge gave a flick of her wand at the parchment on her desk. The pile of parchment rose up into the air, divided out into groups of 3 in midair and then landed, 3 pieces of parchment in front of each student. Now this is nothing to worry about, insisted Professor Umbridge. This is just so that I, as your new teacher in this subject, can get a true feeling as to where each of you stand in your understanding of the subject matter at hand. To Harry this made sense, but he, like so many others in this class, could only remember one other instance in which a new professor had given them a quiz during their first lesson with them. Professor Lockhart's quiz questions had had nothing to do with the subject that he was teaching. Hopefully the case would be different here. "Books away and quills out," said Professor Umbridge. "There is to be no talking during the test, and anyone seen copying will lose 10 house points. Each of the 3 pages before you has 10 questions, and you have 45 minutes in which to answer as many of the 30 questions as you can. The answers expected are short ones, so there will be no need to write out small essays. You may begin, now." As one, the class took up their quills and began reading the first question. "When did the war with the Dark Wizard known as You-Know-Who officially begin? Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 82, ch.82. Harry pondered on that for a few moments. He knew that Voldemort had been defeated on October 31, 1981, which he should know, as he was involved, and he also knew that the war had lasted approximately 11 years. Next to him he could hear Hermione's quill scratching away. This subject had never actually come up in a history of magic lesson before now, but Harry was certain that he had read it somewhere before. He remembered that it coincided with another date, something that was to do with America. Then it hit him and he scribbled down his answer, 4th July, 1970. He looked to the next question. When did the war with You-Know-Who officially end? Easy, thought Harry as he scribbled down the date, 31st October, 1981. When did the wizarding community of Great Britain officially enter into the war with Gellert Grindelwald? That brought Harry up short. He knew that the war with Grindelwald ended when Dumbledore defeated the man in a duel in 1945, but Harry wasn't sure whether or not forces from the British Ministry had been fighting in the conflict before then. He had a feeling that they had been, but he couldn't be certain. Deciding to come back to that one later, Harry read the next question. When did the war against Grindelwald end? Harry noted down the year, 1945, but of the exact date he was not certain. Who was the first female Minister for Magic of Great Britain? Again Harry knew this one, but it was down to a chocolate frog card, not a history of magic lesson that he knew it to be Artemisia Lufkin. In what year were St. Mungo's Hospital founded? Harry didn't have a clue. Nor did he know the answer for question 7, which Minister for Magic approved the implementation of the Hogwarts Express? Question 8 proved easier. 8. In what year did the International Statute of Secrecy first come into effect? Harry had just written his answer, 1692, when Professor Umbridge's voice rang out through the silence. "Mr. Weasley, that will be 10 points from Gryffindor. And if I catch you trying to look at Mr. Longbottom's answers again, you will be serving a detention." Like the rest of the class, Harry turned his head to look at Ron, who had gone rather pink around the ears. Next to him, Neville was shifting himself and his work closer to the edge of the table. "Try using your bag, Mr. Longbottom," said Professor Umbridge. Neville nodded and picked his book bag up off the floor. He then set it down on the table between himself and Ron, making it harder to the red-headed boy to try and sneak a glacé. "There," said Professor Umbridge. "Carry on, class." Harry turned back to the questions. 9. When was Gringotts Wizarding Bank put into full control of the Goblin Nation? Harry knew that the year was 1865, but he had no idea as to anything more specific than that. The same went for question 10. He knew that the British Ministry was founded in 1625, but he could not be more specific than that. Question 11 was about how in 1750, Clause 73 was added to the International Statute of Secrecy. The question asked what the clause related to, but Harry had no idea, so he moved on to question 12. 12. what practice was banned by the ministry in 1965? Harry knew the answer to this one, but only because the school gamekeeper, Hagrid, had broken that very law last year by crossing a manticore with a fire crab to create his infamous blast-ended Screwits. Experimental breeding of magical creatures. Harry wrote. Question 13 proved to be another that he had no clue how to answer. Harry had never heard of Pierre Bonnecourt, or his desire to grant rights to trolls. Therefore he had no idea which country did not want to join the International Confederation of Wizards when he was made the organization's first Supreme Mugwump. 14. Before its revival in 1994, when was the Tri-Wizard tournament last held? After being forced to compete in the stupid tournament the previous year, Harry had made sure to read up on past tournaments and could, with certainty, note down that the last one had been in 1792. Question 15 was on a topic that sounded familiar to him. He remembered about the common Welsh green dragon attacking a group of sunbathers, and he remembered how the witch Tilly Toke and her family had driven the creature off before anyone could be seriously hurt, but the question asked where the incident had occurred, and for the life of him Harry could not remember where it had happened, though he had a feeling that it might have been somewhere in the West Country. Perhaps near where Ron and his family lived. He moved on to question 16, which he was able to answer. In 1935, the witch Jocunda Sykes had made history by being the first person ever to fly from one side of the Atlantic Ocean to the other on a broomstick. He left question 17 unanswered, having no idea just who built the famous Leaky Cauldron pub in 1500. Nor could he answer question 18. Despite being a keen Quidditch player, who had read the book Quidditch through the ages several times, he had no idea when the ban on players using their wands on members of the opposite team had first come into effect. He had never heard of Almeric Sawbridge or what he was famous for doing, and so left question 19 unanswered as well. Nor could he answer question 20, which asked when the Werewolf Code of Conduct was passed by the Ministry. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60 plus premium chapters. Link, p*patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 83, ch.83. However, he was able to answer question 21, which was about a goblin rebellion, one of Professor Binns's preferred topics to drone on about. Harry was certain that, during the Goblin Rebellion of 1612, it had been the 3 broomsticks in which had served at the Wizards' headquarters in Hogsmeade Village. He was also able to answer question 22. The Quidditch tournament that had been established in 1652 was the European Cup. Question 23, however, was a different matter. He had no idea how the Great Fire of London had actually been caused. He, like everyone else, thought it had begun in a bakery, but the question clearly said that it didn't occur there. The Muggles just thought it did. Similarly, Harry had no idea when the Ministry had first labelled the torture, killing and imperious curses as being unforgivable. He had heard of Gideon Flatworthy and his group of anti-Muggle extremists, but he had no idea what they had called themselves. Nor, for that matter, could he say he knew what dangerous Scottish sport was outlawed in 1762. Therefore he left questions 24, 25, and 26 unanswered. After pondering it for a bit, he also left question 27, who, in 1811, laid out the current definition of a being, unanswered. For question 28, what mode of wizarding transport was first put into operation in 1865, he took a wild stab in the dark and put down the night bus. Question 29 turned out to be a dawdle. The Ministry passed the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery in 1875. He knew that because that law had screwed with him on several occasions in the past. The final question, like question 28, was also filled in as a wild stab in the dark. Harry had never heard anything of the so-called Squib Rights Marches and so had no idea which decade they had occurred in. Hoping that perhaps the Squibs had been somewhat influenced by what was going on in the Muggle world at the time, Harry wrote down the 1960s and hoped for the best. He looked through his questions and found that he had only answered exactly half of the questions, and of the answers he had given there were more than a few that he was unsure were correct. After thinking hard on it, Harry finally got the answer to the question about the dragon, the sunbathers, and Tilly Toke. Given that the event was known as the Ilfracombe incident, it followed that the incident had taken place in Ilfracombe, which was in the county of Devon, which was where Ron lived, like he had thought. He glanced up at the front desk where Professor Umbridge had set up an hourglass. He appeared to have 15 minutes or so remaining. To his right, Hermione's quill had stopped its scratching movements over the parchment before her, though whether this was because she had finished or was stuck was anyone's guess. There were no sounds of quill movements coming from Harry's left either, though it was most likely that this was because Ron was stuck. Harry looked back to the question about the leaky cauldron. Who had built it? He felt like he ought to know this. He was relatively certain that it was a woman who had built the pub, but her name escaped him. He had a feeling that her first name might have been a flower, but he couldn't. It hit him. Daisy. That was her name. He wrote it down. Daisy. But Daisy what? Harry pondered it, and for some reason that her name might have something to do with the way you would describe an old person in an uncomplimenting way. Senile maybe, no. Crackpot, probably not. Doddering, yes, that sounded right. Daisy Doddering. It seemed to fit, but not quite. After a few moments of thought he changed it to Daisy Dodderidge. That sounded more fitting. He went through several of the questions again, and came upon the one about Gideon Flatworthy and his group of anti-Muggle extremists. What was their name? For some reason, the summoning charm came to mind. He had a feeling that the incantation for that spell, Oxio, was important here, but he could not think why. In his mind he said the incantation over and over again, but each time added a different letter of the alphabet on the end, hoping that sounding it out like that would help. Oxio, Oxyob, Oxio, and so on until Oxion, which sounded right, and a moment later he had his answer. Gideon Flatworthy and his group of anti-Muggle extremists had called themselves the Oxionites. Proud of himself, he jotted down the answer. After that he read through all of the unanswered questions again and thought really hard, but he was unable to come up with any more answers. He did, however, change his last answer from the 1960s to the 1970s, purely because he was so unsure. But then he changed his answer back, reasoning that Squib writes marches, and Squib subsequently getting better rights during the latter half of the 1960s would have driven more purebloods to Voldemort's side when the war began in 1970. Finally Professor Umbridge called out, "Put your quills down please, and swap your papers with the person sitting next to you for marking." Harry dropped his quill back into the ink pot and then handed his question papers to Hermione, who, in turn, passed hers to him. He was quite surprised to see several unanswered questions. "Very well," said Professor Umbridge, "if we are all ready, we will go through the paper together. Question 1, when did the war with the Dark Wizard known as You-Know-Who officially begin, anyone? Deciding that he might as well commit to the class, Harry raised his hand as Hermione did the same. "Yes, Mr. Potter," asked Professor Umbridge. "The July 4th, 1970. "Very good," said Professor Umbridge. As most moved to mark their neighbor's answer, Seamus Finnegan raised his hand, prompting Umbridge to call on him. "Dean got 1970, but not the July 4th bit," explained Seamus. "Then he gets half a point," replied Professor Umbridge, moving on. And so it went on until, and finally, in what decade did the Squib Rights marches take place? Hermione was called on and she replied the 1960s. "Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60 plus premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 84, ch.84. Excellent, said Professor Umbridge. Now would you all please total up the scores of the papers you are marking and then hand them back. Harry totaled up Hermione's marks and scribbled down on the first page the number 21.5. Except for one instance when she only got half a mark, all of her other answers had been completely correct. The remaining 8 points lost related to 8 questions that she had been unable to answer. Perhaps unsurprisingly, 2 of the questions that had been unanswered were the ones relating to Quidditch. He handed the test back to her, and Hermione returned his to him. He looked at his score and saw that he had gotten a measly 15.5. He had thought that he had done better than that, but looking over his parchment there were at least 3 examples of him only getting half the answer. Well, at least his guesses about the night bus and the Squibbright's marches had been correct. Now then, said Professor Umbridge, who was now sitting down at her desk with a large piece of parchment in front of her, when I call your name, please call out your scores so that I can make a note of it. Abbott, Hannah. Hannah's cheeks were slightly pink with embarrassment when she called out 18. Well, she did better than me, thought Harry. Bones, Susan. 19. Susan called. Brown, Lavender. 10. The Gryffindor girl called out meekly. It turned out that Lavender had very little to be ashamed of. At least she had gotten up to double figures. Many who came after her could not say the same. Hermione was the only person to score in the 20s, and Harry's score actually placed him in the top 5, with Neville, somewhat surprisingly, beating him by half a mark with a well-rounded 16. Ron's ears were bright red when he was called upon last. His mumbled 6 was barely audible. That placed him at the bottom of the class, and even then it was debatable how many of those answers were his own and how many were copied from Neville before he was caught. Very well, said Professor Umbridge as she rolled up the sheet of parchment containing their scores. Please pass your question papers to the front, and I will use them to plan out what areas we need to focus on as the year goes by. I should warn you that we will be having a test again somewhere in the near future so that we can see how much progress you are making. Most of the class groaned at this news, but Harry noticed Hermione sit up a little straighter after hearing that she was going to get the opportunity to beat her score. Harry actually thought that this was a good way to learn. Back in primary school, the maths teacher had used this method every Friday afternoon to make sure that they were all learning. Harry had found that to be a much better way to learn his times tables than when they all sat there droning out 1 2 is 2, 2 2s are 4, 3 2s are 6. And so on. Also that there might be a test at any time, Umbridge had not stated exactly when it would happen, could only mean that they would spend more time studying the course material. Shortly thereafter, the lesson ended. Class dismissed, said Professor Umbridge brightly. Mr. Potter, could you stay behind please? Wondering what she could possibly want now, Harry swung the strap of his book bag onto his shoulder and made his way to the front of the classroom as everyone else headed towards the door at the back of the room. It seems you were wise to bring this to the attention of the Ministry, said Professor Umbridge after the last student had left. She shook her head ruefully. No one of your classmates got question 23 correct. Which one was that again? Asked Harry. The one about how the Great Fire of London started, replied Umbridge. The Muggles all thought that it began in a bakery, but some fool of a wizard living in the next house over was keeping a young common Welsh green dragon in his basement illegally. He managed to apparate out of course and the dragon was able to fly away, but it was seen by most of the population of the city. Had the international statute of secrecy been in effect then, it would have been one of the biggest breaches of it ever. You're going to have to report this, aren't you? Asked Harry. I must, yes, replied Umbridge. Be sure to have your report about the incident on the train completed by tomorrow evening. I can send it to the Ministry with mine. Of course, replied Harry before asking was there anything else. Be sure to keep an eye on that Gryffindor prefect. The Weasley boy. Something tells me he will be the first to lose his prefect's badge. I've been thinking the same thing, said Harry, honestly. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, p*atreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 85, ch.85. A few moments later, Harry left the classroom and began to make his way towards the library. As he walked he cursed his luck. When he had arranged to meet with Padma after dinner, he had quite forgotten about having to write a report about Malfoy and Parkinson's behavior on the train for submittal to the Ministry. As he did not want to miss out on his date later, Harry resigned himself to skipping his morning break in order to write the report in the library. It was a simple enough task to complete as it was essentially just filling in a form, much like a prefect had to when reporting a transgression of a student. The problem was that it was just so time-consuming. Once inside the library he found himself an empty table in a secluded corner and dumped his book bag down on top of it before pulling out a seat to sit in. From his bag he pulled out 4 of the forms, 1 for Malfoy, 1 for Parkinson, 1 for Crabbe and 1 for Goyle. In the spaces indicated, he filled out what their names were, which house they were in, which year they were in, what their transgressions were and what punishment he had given them. There was also a small box that he had to tick on Malfoy and Parkinson's forms, indicating that they were prefects. He finished filling out the last form just as the bell signaling the end of break rang out. Harry pulled out his wand and used a copying charm, as taught to him by Madame Bones, in order to make several copies of each form. 1 copy was for Professor Umbridge to keep, 1 was for the school records, 1 was for the Wizarding Examinations Authority at the Ministry and the last one Harry decided he ought to keep for himself, just in case. He then slid all of those forms back into his book bag and left the library. Somehow he didn't think that missing the beginning of potions would go down too well. Harry arrived in the corridor outside the dungeon classroom to find that, while he was certainly not the first to arrive, he also was not the last this time. Once again it seemed like the people who had organized the class schedule for the year had decided to stick with the old method of lumping the Gryffindors with the Slytherins for this class. Never a good combination. So far the only Slytherins present were Blaise Zabini, Daphne Greengrass, and Tracy Davis. Blaise was talking to the 2 girls, but the conversations appeared to be one-sided. So Malfoy was all red in the face, yet? And he did his usual wait until my father hears about this bit. Harry fought back the smirk that had threatened to break out onto his face upon hearing that. Although he insisted to everyone who commented on it that he had only been doing his job in punishing Malfoy, Harry had felt a good amount of satisfaction in finally being able to knock Malfoy down a peg in a way that did not involve Quidditch. Honestly, who wouldn't feel that way after having to put up with Malfoy's crap being directed at them for 4 years? Blaise broke off when he and the other 2 noticed Harry's arrival. Since that he was going to have to make nice with the Slytherins that evening at dinner, Harry figured that he might as well try and make some headway now, so offered up a simple hello. Blaise turned away from him. Daphne kept her eyes on him, but her expression remained completely indifferent. Only Tracy actually acknowledged him, offering a small smile in return. Any further attempts by Harry to break the ice with the Slytherins were halted by the arrival of Malfoy and his gang, Pansy Parkinson, Vincent Crabbe, Gregory Goyle, Millicent Bulstrode, and Theodore Nott. Apparently Malfoy had been saying something really funny if their collective laughter was anything to go by. That all quickly stopped, though, once they saw Harry standing there. Ron and Hermione were the next to arrive, followed shortly after by Neville, Dean, and Seamus. Then came Lavender Brown and Parvati Patil. The remaining stragglers arrived mere moments before the dungeon door opened and the hook-nosed Professor Snape ordered them all inside. Astonishingly, Snape failed to direct even one derogatory remark towards Harry for the entire lesson. For that matter, the normally rather vindictive man seemed to barely even acknowledge Harry's existence. And it wasn't just Harry either. While not his worst ever mishap in potions, Neville's soothing solution producing copious amounts of purple smoke would normally have resulting in the potions professor directing a verbal diatribe at the boy before vanishing his work, giving him a 0 score and deducting 20 points from Gryffindor. Today, Snape merely vanished the smoke, bit out an angry "cut the soybeans, Longbottom," Don't crush them, and then swept away in a billow of black robes to correct Goyle's attempt. From the table behind him, Harry heard Seamus whisper to Dean, "What's with him?" "Dunno," replied Dean. "Maybe he's learned his lesson after Harry told him off at breakfast. Or maybe Dumbledore had words with him," offered the voice of Parvati. "Told him to keep his head down." "Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60 plus premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 86, ch.86. Harry thought on both of those possibilities as he diced up the kidney of a willow warbler. This was Snape's natural response to his and Harry's confrontation in the Great Hall earlier. Then Harry had greatly underestimated the man's capabilities of self-restraint. If, however, this new attitude was on Dumbledore's orders, Harry was certain that it was taking every ounce of willpower the man had to keep it going, and it was unlikely that it would be long before the cracks in the facade became obvious. Sure enough, Snape let himself down at the end of the lesson. "By now your soothing solutions should all now be a pale blue in color. Please place a sample in a glass vial, label it with your name and bring it to the front to be marked." All things considered, Harry thought that his soothing solution had turned out pretty well. The color was slightly off, but he felt that it at least deserved a passing grade. It seemed to him that he was actually quite good at potions when Snape wasn't breathing down his neck and making his usual snide comments. He momentarily forgot, however, that such a grade was only likely to be given to him by a fair teacher. And a fair teacher was something that Severus Snape most certainly was not. Harry gently poured some of the potion into one of his vials, stoppered the top and wrote his name on the label. Then he took it up to the front and placed it onto Snape's desk alongside several others. When he turned to head back to his table, he heard a smash and turned back to Snape's desk. The man was wearing a superior sneer on his face, and the file that Harry had placed on his desk was lying in smashed pieces on the floor of the classroom. "Oh dear," said Snape, "I do believe that will have to be a 0 for today's lesson, Potter." This wasn't the first time that Snape had pulled this stunt on him, only this time Harry wasn't going to put up with it. He pulled out his wand and cast a repairing charm on the smashed remains of the file, which rose into the air and joined back together like some kind of 3D jigsaw puzzle. Harry took the mended file back to his desk, poured some more of the potion into it, stoppered it, and returned it to Snape's desk. Every other student in that classroom was standing completely still, most hardly daring to breathe as Harry and Snape stared each other down. Several of them wondered if the long-anticipated day in which one of the two finally snapped and killed the other was now upon them. A minute of silence passed before Harry finally turned once again back towards the table where he had been working. And once again there was a smash and his file mysteriously fell from Snape's desk and crashed to the stone floor of the dungeon classroom. All eyes were not on Harry, who bit down hard on his bottom lip to prevent himself from saying anything. He took out his wand and repaired the smashed file once again before returning to his cauldron and filling the file with the contents of the cauldron once more. He stoppered it and placed it down onto his desk. Then he took another 3 glass vials from his set of potions instruments and filled all 3 before stoppering each one and labeling them. Next he vanished the remaining potion from the cauldron before, with a few flicks of his wand, he packed all his remaining equipment away. Then he picked up all 4 stoppered files and, rather than place them all down on Snape's desk like they were all expecting him to, he walked towards the door of the classroom. "Potter!" Snape shouted after him. "Potions brewed by students are not allowed to be taken beyond the walls of this classroom." Harry ignored him. Cradling all 4 files in one arm, he wrenched the door open with the other and marched out of the classroom and into the corridor beyond. As he made his way up one of the staircases, the bell rang to signal the end of the lesson and the start of their lunch hour. He quickly found himself in the corridor that led to the History of Magic classroom, and he pushed his way by a group of third-year students in order to get to the classroom. Professor Umbridge was just coming out of her classroom when she spotted him. "Potter, what in Merlin's name is the matter?" she asked. Harry told her what had happened down in the dungeon classroom, and she wasn't happy at what she heard. How dare he try and sabotage the Ministry like this, she demanded rhetorically. The Ministry? Asked Harry in confusion. Isn't it obvious? Potter, you were appointed to your new position by the Ministry. By sabotaging your classwork and failing you as a result, Professor Snape attempting to discredit not only you but the Ministry. He is attempting to make it appear as though we selected the wrong person for the job and therefore compromise our mission here. Harry doubted that Snape's goal had anything to do with the Ministry and was just a simple manifestation of the man's usual malicious attitude towards him, but if spinning the story this way could be used to get rid of Snape sooner, then who was Harry to argue? The greasy-haired git was already on there to observe closely list, and it was long past time that the students of Hogwarts were allowed to learn potions in a productive and encouraging environment, free from disparaging comments and hatred. At this moment we are, unfortunately, powerless to have him removed from the castle. Umbridge continued. We can, however, document this incident and use it to advantage at a later date. I trust that you will be lodging a formal complaint. I will, answered Harry, but I doubt that Dumbledore will pay it any mind. Which is why you will make multiple copies of your complaint, said Umbridge. Keep one copy for yourself and make one for my own records, then we'll send one to the Board of Governors, one to the Wizarding Examinations Authority at the Ministry, and then one for Dumbledore to ignore, as you say. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60 plus premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 87, ch.87. Harry nodded his head thoughtfully before asking, but what about the potion? Is there any way for its quality to be examined? I think it would help my case if I could say with honesty that my work was any good. Umbridge appeared to think for a moment, and then said, leave 2 of the files here with me, and I'll arrange for Madame Marchbanks to look them over as soon as possible. Take the other 2 to Madame Pomfrey and ask her what she thinks of them. She should have a decent level of potions knowledge to make a fair judgment. Okay, thanks, replied Harry, handing over 2 of the files. Oh, and before I forget, I managed to write out the reports on the misbehaving Slytherins. He set down the last 2 potion files and swung his bag off of his shoulder to fish out the completed forms. He pulled out all 12 forms and began counting them out. So these 4 are for you, these 4 are for the Wizarding Examinations Authority, these 4 are for the school, and these 4, well, I thought I'd keep a copy of each report for myself. A very astute move, Mr. Potter, said Umbridge. It always pays to keep a copy for yourself, as you never know when you might need it. I would recommend doing the same for any homework you are given, especially if it is for potions. Right, Harry agreed, making sure to store that piece of advice in his mind. Thanks for the tip. Now, I had really better get down to the Great Hall. I'm supposed to eat lunch at the Ravenclaw table. Gotta be seen to be mixing. It's the best way to learn what's going on. Oh, I quite agree, replied Umbridge. I'll make sure that these get to the appropriate persons, she added, referencing the forms. Harry stored the last 2 potions files safely away in his box of potions equipment, which had its own compartment in his school bag. Then he left the classroom and headed down to the Great Hall. How much lunch he could eat, and how much talking he could do with the Ravenclaws would depend entirely on how quickly Snape could have Dumbledore charging to his defense. Down in the Great Hall, Harry quickly noted that Snape was absent, as were Dumbledore and McGonagall. A good number of the students' eyes turned towards him as he headed over to the Ravenclaw table. Conversations came to a halt as he passed, and Harry was fairly certain that he knew what topic they were all discussing. Padma beckoned him over and he gratefully sat himself down in the empty seat located between her and small girl with dirty blonde hair who appeared to be a 4th year. Afternoon, all, Harry offered in greeting as he sat down. He was correct, of course, as it was nearly 1:45. And here he is, said Terry Boot from the opposite side of the table, a wide grin on his face. The man of the hour, added Michael Corner, who was sitting next to him. Man of the century more like, corrected Anthony Goldstein. What? Asked Harry, bemusedly. Don't give us that, Potter, said Michael. You know exactly what we mean. Yeah, agreed Terry. You faced down the overgrown bat of Slytherin House not once but twice. And in the same day, added Anthony. If that doesn't make you the man of the century, I don't know what does. There was no face-off between me and Snape, replied Harry as he spooned a helping of mashed potatoes onto his plate. Well, not since the one at breakfast, anyway. So what happened? Asked Padma anxiously, because everyone's saying that the two of you had a massive fight in your potions class earlier. There was no fight, said Harry. Snape was just being a complete jackass and refused to mark my work, so I walked out of the lesson. Doesn't that send the wrong message though? Asked Lisa Turpin from her seat on Padma's other side. I mean, you are the student advisor, surely walking out of the classroom sets a bad example. Harry shook his head and replied, actually I think that I set a very good example. Snape was being extremely unreasonable in his actions, so rather than stand there arguing until I was blue in the face and gaining myself a month's worth of detentions, I simply walked away from the situation. Snape was the one acting out of line, and I took the best course of action available to me by walking out of there before things could get worse. Well, when you put it like that, said Lisa, trailing off thoughtfully. Are you going to lodge a complaint against him? Asked Padma. Yup, replied Harry as he used a piece of bread to mop up some of the gravy on his plate. Terry snorted and said, good luck with that. Snape's had loads of complaints made against him but nothing ever happens. Which is why copies of my complaint are going to be heading to the Board of Governors and the Wizarding Examinations Authority, replied Harry. Just because Dumbledore won't hear a bad word said about Snape doesn't mean that others aren't prepared to listen. I'll keep that in mind, said Anthony. He picks on you lot as well? Asked Harry. Not quite so much as he does the Gryffindors, replied Lisa, but yet, he does. Though mostly our complaints are about his overall teaching style, said Michael. Or lack thereof, said the small blonde-haired girl. Harry looked at her, and saw that she had wide, slightly protuberant eyes, and was wearing what appeared to be radishes for earrings, and a necklace of corks from butter beer bottles. Harry, this is Luna Lovegood, said Padma, politely making the introduction. Luna, this is, well, I suppose you already know. Hello, Luna, said Harry politely, holding out his hand. She didn't shake it. In fact, it was doubtful that she even noticed it as she was staring so intently at his face. It's good to see that the Raxperts have left you, Harry. Your head was full of them last year during the tournament. Thanks, said Harry, not really sure how to take that. Anthony had to look down at his plate to keep from laughing, and Terry bit down on his lip. Michael, however, showed no such restraint and snorted loudly. Padma kicked him hard under the table. Snape does leave a lot to be desired, said Harry in a desperate attempt to return the conversation to its former topic. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 88, ch.88. However, that was before remembering another reason why he had wanted to sit with the Ravenclaws this lunchtime. By the way, Padma, I've come up with a little plan for us this evening. Oh yeah, said Lisa with a grin. I forgot that Hogwarts' hottest new couple were having their first date. Tony, ouch. Harry had the distinct impression that Lisa too had just gotten a good kicking under the table, once again courtesy of Padma. The Ravenclaw prefect glared at her wincing dorm mate before turning her attention back to Harry and asking with a pleasant smile, so what have you got planned for me? That is a surprise, replied Harry mysteriously, though fair warning, don't eat too much at dinner. Gotcha, replied Padma, before. Potter. Harry winced a little at the sound of Professor McGonagall's voice calling out loudly to him from across the Great Hall. Damn, he growled before getting to his feet and making his way over to the deputy headmistress. You know, said Padma. I've suddenly got a sinking feeling that my date tonight is going to be cancelled due to that greasy git. Lisa patted her on the back sympathetically. Harry followed along behind Professor McGonagall as the Transfiguration teacher led him up towards the headmaster's office. He, like Padma, had a sinking feeling that their date tonight was going to be cancelled for them by outside forces, namely a greasy, bat-like git with a hooked nose and a twinkly-eyed, interfering old codger with a long white beard. He wasn't paying too much attention to his surroundings, and so had nearly passed by the doors to the hospital wing before remembering that he needed to go in there. I've just got to pop in here for a minute, Harry announced to Professor McGonagall, who had not noticed that he had stopped walking. She wheeled around and demanded the hospital wing? Whatever for? It'll just take a minute, Harry reiterated. I just need to see Madame Pomfrey about something. Surely whatever it is can wait until after the headmaster. Harry ignored her and pushed open the doors of the hospital wing. All of the beds were empty, and he found Madame Pomfrey sitting at her desk going over some paperwork, a steaming bowl of oxtail soup and a half-eaten bread roll sitting off to one side. Harry knocked on the door to her office and she turned around to face him. "Ah, Mr. Potter. I was wondering how long it would be before you paid me your first visit of the year." Harry smiled at that. He did normally spend quite a bit of the school year in Madame Pomfrey's care. "Unfortunately, I am not here to seek medical attention just yet," he replied. "I just need your opinion on something." "Yes?" she asked, sounding suspicious. Harry swung his bag off his shoulder and began fishing out his potions kit. "It's about a potion, Madame Pomfrey. You know a bit about them, I trust." "Medical ones mostly," the matron replied. "This is a soothing solution," said Harry. She nodded and beckoned for him to place the 2 files on her desk. McGonagall tried to interrupt. "Mr. Potter, we really must get up to the headmaster's office. This can wait until later." "If the reason for my being dragged to the headmaster's office is the one I am thinking of, then this needs to be done now," replied Harry without turning to look at her. "Madame Pomfrey, in your professional opinion, is this soothing solution any good?" Madame Pomfrey picked up one of the files and held it up to examine it. "Color's a little off, but nothing too major." She unstoppered the file and held it up to her nose to give it a sniff. "The smell appears to be fine." She reached for one of the drawers in her desk and pulled it out. From within she took what appeared to be the wizarding equivalent of a petri dish, which she set onto her desk before pouring a few small drops of Harry's potion into it. She picked up the petri dish and swirled it around a bit before stopping to study the contents within. "The viscosity is a little too runny, but all in all it appears to be fine." "Really?" asked Harry. "Yes. It's not a perfect example of the potion in question, but it is more than passable. If fed to a patient it will do the job required of it." "Great," said Harry before asking, "Listen, could you do me a favor and write that down for me?" "I can, but why not ask Professor Snape?" asked the matron. "It was Professor Snape who refused to give me a mark for it," replied Harry. "Other than a resounding 0, of course." Madame Pomfrey appeared to be surprised at what she had just heard. For a moment Harry wondered if she doubted his comments about Snape, but his worries were quickly proven unfounded when she asked, "You brewed this?" "Yeah, why?" asked Harry in puzzlement. She stoppered the file she had opened and handed it to him before replying, "I oversee a small club on a Thursday evening for all of those who wish to practice brewing potions for healing purposes. It's normally for those with a real affinity for potions, but with a few lessons you should fit right in." "Thank you," replied Harry. "Hannah Abbott mentioned that club this morning at breakfast. I'll look into coming along." "See that you do," said Madame Pomfrey. "It's nice to see that some of your mother's talents were passed on to you. Until now I thought you had only inherited your father's flying skills and penchant for getting into mischief." "Thank you," said Harry once again, feeling something bubbling up inside of him. His mum had been good in the art of brewing potions. Sarah had mentioned that before now, but somehow hearing it from a medical professional like Madame Pomfrey allowed it to be fully confirmed in his mind. He didn't doubt Sarah, but there was always the chance that she was exaggerating a little about her old friends. But now it was confirmed. And he, Harry, appeared to have inherited that talent. Madame Pomfrey handed him a piece of parchment, on which she had written down her professional assessment of this potion and, after thanking her for her time, Harry followed Professor McGonagall out of the hospital wing. As they made their way towards Dumbledore's office, Harry felt as though he was in some kind of bubble of joy. His mum had been good at potions, and he had inherited that from her. Of course, this realization quickly led to the question of why had this talent not manifested itself in any way, shape, or form before now. He recalled his first trip to Diagon Alley. He remembered being particularly fascinated by the apothecary where the majority of the potions ingredients required for school were supplied, and when he had returned to his relative's home in Privet Drive he had spent a good deal of his time learning what the basic tools for potion brewing were and how they were used. He had so looked forwards to making bubbling and boiling concoctions of many kinds, to brewing up antidotes and preparing solutions that were designed to make people feel better. What had happened to that feeling? What had happened to make him not only dislike potions, but also suppress his capabilities in the subject? As he and Professor McGonagall entered Dumbledore's office, the answer to those questions appeared, looming over him like a greasy, overgrown bat with a superior sneer on his face. The bubble of joy popped, and Harry steeled himself to once again face down the headmaster, his lapdog, and his pet potions master. Another meeting with the headmaster, he thought, somewhat bitterly. Well, this really must now be some kind of record. The first day of classes isn't even over yet. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 89, ch.89. Harry, have a seat please, said Professor Dumbledore, gesturing to one of the empty seats located on the opposite side of his desk. He really did not wish to sit down, in fact he did wish to be here at all, but he sat anyway. I assume that you know why you are here, asked Dumbledore. Harry was well aware that this question was meant to be rhetorical, but answered anyway. No, I don't. Of course, he knew perfectly well why he was here, but knew that his answer would throw Dumbledore for a moment. Dumbledore stared at him for a moment before trying to mask his surprise by asking, "You don't know why you are here?" "Nope," he replied. "Professor McGonagall summoned me and ordered me to follow her up here but gave no reason." Dumbledore fixed him with a look and asked, "And you can think of no reason as to why you might have been asked here? Other than the possibility of you wanting to once again go over the specifics of our previous 2 meetings, then no, I cannot think of a reason." "So you have no recollection of walking out of Professor Snape's potions lesson earlier?" asked Dumbledore. "Oh, that," said Harry in a tone that suggested that only Dumbledore's mentioning of his had brought it to the forefront of his mind. "That was a simple situation that is being blown out of proportion." "Arrogant brat," snapped Snape. "You're just like your father, never able to admit when he was in the wrong." At this point Harry stopped listening and tilted his head backwards and closed his eyes, his lips moving slightly as he spoke silently. "What are you doing, Mr. Potter?" asked Professor McGonagall. Harry opened his eyes to look at her and answered, "I am counting backwards from 20 in order to help keep myself calm. It's a well-established method, as is walking away from a situation that irritates you." He turned back to Dumbledore and said, "As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, the situation in the potions classroom has been blown out of proportion. Near the end of the lesson, we were asked to place a sample of our work into a file and hand it in. I did so, and Snape here decided to knock my work to the floor so as to—" "Don't lie, Potter," snarled Snape, interrupting him once again. Harry glared hatefully at the man before closing his eyes and tilting his head back once again. Snape made to say something else, but Dumbledore held up a hand to stop him. Harry successfully counted down from 20 and then took a deep breath in order to speak again. "Snape knocked my potion to the floor. When I collected another sample he smashed." "Headmaster, Surely you don't believe this nonsense, ranted Snape. At this Harry stood and reached into his bag and took out his potions supply kit. From within he took the 2 phials of soothing solutions that he had made and set them onto Dumbledore's desk. This one was tested by Madame Pomfrey, he said. Regarding the one of the left, the other has not been touched since coming out of my cauldron. He reached into his robes and pulled out the piece of parchment that Madame Pomfrey had given him and used his wand to make a copy before tucking the original away again. This is a written review of my potion from Madame Pomfrey. 2 other files are being sent by Professor Umbridge to the offices of the Wizarding Examinations Authority at the Ministry, accompanied by a letter of explanation. This meeting is now over. And with that he slung his bag over his shoulder and marched towards the doors of the office. Harry, please return to your seat, Dumbledore called after him, and Snape shouted, "Get back here, Potter!" Harry ignored the both of them and wrenched the office door open. I believe he just executed his second method of not losing your temper, observed Professor McGonagall. Dumbledore heaved a great sigh and asked Minerva, if you would. The Transfiguration Professor nodded and left the office in pursuit of Harry. Once she was gone, Dumbledore turned in his seat in order to face the potions master. Is any of what Harry said true, Severus? Snape's nostrils flared in anger, but he said nothing. I have already warned you, Severus, said Dumbledore. In our current position you would do well to not antagonize young Harry so much. You must learn to keep your hatred for his father in check. Again Snape said nothing. Instead he turned in a swish of his black robes and performed the same move that Harry had now used twice against him, walking away from the situation. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 90, ch.90. Mr. Potter. McGonagall called out as she finally caught sight of him, in a corridor 2 flights of stairs away from the headmaster's office. He came to a halt and spun around to face her. She caught up to him and was just about to ask him to return to Dumbledore's office when he cut her off with a question of his own. Are students attending Hogwarts allowed to hire their own personal tutors if they feel that the school's professors are not good enough? The question gave McGonagall pause for a moment. It was certainly a common practice for students to have their own tutors back when she had been a student, though usually these had been for extra lessons in a subject, or for a subject not taught at Hogwarts. There were, of course, a handful of cases where the parents of a student requested their child be taught by a tutor rather than attend any of the lessons put on by Hogwarts staff, but those cases were few. However, in all of her years of teaching, not once had a student had their own tutor. If you wanted to learn potions you went to Snape, if you wanted to learn charms you went to Flitwick. In addition there were clubs, such as the one that Madame Pomfrey ran for those wanting to learn a few healing techniques, and there was the Charms Club, as well as the out-of-school lessons. But the idea of a student relying solely upon a tutor rather than make use of a Hogwarts professor was all but unheard of. Not since Dumbledore became headmaster. She thought, but it was quickly quashed. There is no rule against it, but such a thing has not happened in years, she answered him. Well then, it is about to happen, said Harry. Snape has made it very clear throughout the last 4 years that he does not want to teach me anything, and I see no reason why my education should suffer because of his attitude problems. I will be contacting the Wizarding Examinations Authority to see if they can recommend anyone for the job, and I will tell you now, if any student wishes to join me in my tutorial periods rather than endure Snape any further, then I, for one, will welcome their decision. Is it really necessary for you to keep in getting the WEA involved in your issues here at the school? Asked McGonagall. If you have a complaint to make, then it pays to make it to someone who will listen, replied Harry. Countless voices have complained about Snape over the years, and Dumbledore has done nothing about him. Nor, for that matter, has the Board of Governors. The WEA is the final option available, and if Dumbledore doesn't like it, then it's just tough luck. He should have reined in his potions master sooner. Just then the man in question came around the corner at the end of the corridor. Without even looking at them he stormed past them and disappeared through the door at the opposite end. The bell rang signaling the end of lunch and the start of afternoon lessons. Harry turned back to McGonagall and said, "You'll have to excuse me, Professor. As much as I would like to stand here and deliberate with you further, I have a study period that I must be getting to." And with that he turned and headed towards the door that Snape had just gone through. At the door he paused and turned back towards the Transfiguration Professor. "Oh, and just so you are aware, unless it is an absolute emergency, any further attempts by the headmaster to summon me to his office today will be ignored. I have more important things to be doing with my time." McGonagall returned to Dumbledore's office and informed him of what Harry had told her. The old man paled slightly and said this cannot be allowed to happen. If Harry starts taking tuition with another teacher, then everyone else will want to follow suit. The portrait of Quentin Trimble spoke up at that point. "Mr. Potter is well within his rights to select for himself an alternate tutor for his potions studies, Dumbledore, and you know this. And if other students choose to follow his lead, then it is nobody's fault other than yours and Snape's," added Vindictus Viridian. "Professor Snape," Dumbledore corrected them almost automatically. The expressions on the faces of numerous past headmasters and headmistresses displayed exactly what they thought of that assertion. "You'll just have to face it, Albus," said McGonagall. "Harry wants nothing more to do with Severus, and I, for one, can't say that I blame him. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a class of third years waiting." In a swirl of tartan she turned and left the office. "We warned you about ignoring all the complaints that are made about Snape, Dumbledore," said Dilys Derwent. "I hope that you are prepared to reap what you have sown." Dumbledore turned away from the portraits and took a lemon drop out of the bowl on his desk, all the while wondering how he was going to force Harry to continue studying potions under Snape's tutelage. "Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 91, ch.91. Harry arrived back at his private quarters and set his school bag down on the table. This was supposed to be the first of his study periods, set aside for the completion of homework and for going over the notes that he had taken in class to make sure that things made sense and that he learned them. However, he currently had no homework, Umbridge's class had not featured any note-taking, and he had learned practically nothing in Snape's class. He cursed himself for stupidly giving up his morning break in order to write out the reports regarding the incident on the Hogwarts Express. He should have left them so that he could have written them now. In the end he decided to pull out his question paper from that morning's history test and go over it in an attempt to imprint the correct answers into his mind. He was just going through question 12 when, quite suddenly, realization struck him. He did not have detention this evening. In spite of his fears, neither Dumbledore nor Snape had managed to say anything about him serving a detention before he left the office, and McGonagall certainly had not informed him that he had one when she had caught up with him, so therefore he didn't have one. That meant that his date with Padma was still on and he hadn't made any arrangements to get a picnic together. "Tippy," he called out into the room. With a pop, Tippy the house elf appeared before him. "Sir is needing Tippy?" she asked in her high voice. Harry grinned. It was nice dealing with a house elf that didn't fan-worship him like Dobby did and who didn't have a drinking problem like Winky did. "Hey, Tippy," he said by way of greeting. "Has Madame Bones found out anything about the food sample I sent?" "Mistress Bones was giving the sample to Mistress Abbott to examine, sir," replied Tippy. "I's be bringing you the answers as soon as they is knowing them." "Right, thanks," said Harry. Tippy, could you do me a favor?" "A favor?" asked Tippy. "Yes, Tippy can be doing a favor for yous, sir. Could you prepare a picnic basket? You know, with a few sandwiches, cakes, and things." "Tippy can," replied the house elf with an eager nod. "Should Tippy be getting the foods from the manor or from the castle?" "The castle," said Harry. "I pay my fees, so why should the food come from elsewhere?" "Okay, sir," said Tippy. When is you wanting the basket? Tell you what, I'll call you when I'm ready, how's that? The house elf nodded and disappeared with a pop. Harry went back to his studies. Harry went down to dinner with no small amount of trepidation that evening. Having sat with the Gryffindors for dinner the previous evening, the Hufflepuffs for breakfast that morning and the Ravenclaws for lunch, it was now time for him to sit with the Slytherins. He was glad that he was going for a picnic afterwards, as he most certainly would not be eating much food at the Slytherin table. Hopefully he would be able to sit himself down with Daphne, Astoria, and Tracy, as they were the least likely to try and murder him. That afternoon's defense against the dark arts class had gone off without a hitch. Professor Tonks had barely acknowledged Harry's existence and took the class as though he wasn't there, which was surprising given how it had been her spying on Harry for Dumbledore that had gotten her fired from the Aurors. Not his fault, but such things rarely seemed to count to magicals. As far as teaching went, Tonks had a fun personality and was good at engaging students in the lesson. She instinctively refrained from talking down to them, as some teachers were prone to doing. However, she was also clumsy and had a habit on knocking things over. She had broken 3 ink pots in that lesson alone, much to the amusement of Harry's classmates. Harry came down the marble stairs and arrived in the entrance hall just as a group of Ravenclaw 5th years came in from their Care of Magical Creatures lesson. Amongst them was Padma. She spotted him but could not reach him through the bustling crowd that was making its way to dinner. Harry gave her a thumbs up and she managed to send him a smile before the tide of students swept her into the great hall. Harry followed the crowd and made his way into the hall. Once inside he looked longingly at the Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw tables, silently wishing that he could be sitting with them, but he steeled him resolve. He had to sit with the Slytherins. This was his role now, and he had to be approachable to all. The hall was now nearly full, so most of the school was there to watch as Harry made his way over to the snake put. The murmur of many conversations went quiet as every eye turned to watch him. Harry was well aware of this as he approached the table in question. He spotted Daphne and Astoria and made a beeline for them. "Good evening, Daphne," he greeted with false cheer. "Astoria, mind if I sit here?" The two sisters exchanged a look before shifting apart, making a space between them. As Harry sat down between them, a red-faced Draco Malfoy stood up from his spot further down the table and yelled, "What do you think you're doing, Scarhead?" "I think that I'm about to have dinner," replied Harry, "and as part of my new role, I have to eat dinner at this table. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 92, ch.92. He reached for a bread roll before adding, "Oh, and I think that I'll be taking 5 house points from you, Draco, for that little bit of name-calling. Really, a prefect should set a better example than that." This of course did nothing to warm the opinions of most of the other Slytherins towards him, but Harry found that he did not particularly care. There was something oddly satisfying about slapping Draco down in the middle of all his housemates. Malfoy's face turned a more vivid red as he shouted, "Shut up, Potter, and go sit with the rest of the Gryffindorks." "And that'll be another 5 house points," said Harry. "Keep this up, Draco, and I'll be awarding you another strike, your second out of 3 in the first 2 days of term." Malfoy sat down. "Not very bright, is he?" asked Harry. "I've always maintained that he only ended up in the House of the Cunning by default of being completely unsuited to any of the other 3, said Daphne. Harry nodded at that. Draco was neither hard-working nor loyal to any other than himself, which eliminated him from Hufflepuff House. He did not appear to be particularly witty nor capable of learning from his mistakes, which eliminated him from Ravenclaw. He did not appear all that brave or all that interested in the differences between right and wrong, unless it was against him, and so that eliminated Gryffindor. And he was not particularly cunning, a desired trait for Slytherins, but he was ambitious, therefore he was a Slytherin. He wondered how many other students had been simply sorted into their houses by default. A shadow fell across Harry and he turned to face the overgrown bat that was blocking the light. "Potter, return to your own house table and stop antagonizing my students. If they become antagonized by someone who is merely doing their job, then that is hardly my fault," replied Harry. "As for my seating arrangements, I have already talking them through with the deputy headmistress and the Ministry of Magic. If you have a complaint, I suggest that you talk with them." 20 points from Gryffindor, sneered Snape. Harry snorted and replied, "Good luck with that. I am no longer a Gryffindor." "Well then, you'll just have to serve a detention instead," said Snape. "Come to my office immediately after dinner." "What for?" demanded Harry, but Snape just turned and walked away. Harry scowled as he watched Snape go. Then he caught sight of Malfoy's triumphant face and had to fight the urge to take 200 house points from Slytherin just because. "What a jerk," said Astoria. "Yeah, hard luck, Harry," said Tracy from her seat opposite them. "Hard luck for him," said Harry. "I'm not going." "You're not?" asked Daphne, sounding surprised. "As much as he might like to think he can, Snape cannot punish me simply for doing what I am supposed to do." "He's not gonna let that stop him, you know," asked Tracy. "I know," said Harry, "but like I said, if he's got a problem with me sitting here, then he will have to take it up with the Wizarding Examinations Authority and the Minister's office, as it is they who appointed me to my position as student advisor, and all the duties that the title entails. If you don't mind my asking, why did you take the position in the first place?" asked Daphne. "I have come to realize that the students in this place often require someone to help fight their corner," replied Harry. "God knows most of the staff aren't up to it, and most of the prefects are chosen out of favoritism rather than merit." He looked pointedly towards Draco as he said this. "True enough, I suppose," said Daphne. "I can honestly say that without your help, Draco and his cronies would have gotten away with their actions on the train." "My point exactly," said Harry. "Certain people in this place have been getting away with bad behavior for far too long. Just wait. By the end of the year, Hogwarts is going to be unrecognizable." He paused for a moment before asking, "Oh, by the way, can you recommend any of the boys in your year that would make a good prefect? Malfoy won't be holding the title for long and I'll need to name a replacement." "Blaise Zabinai is probably your best option," said Daphne, "though I wouldn't exactly recommend him." "Why?" asked Harry. "He's smarter than the rest but like Malfoy in many other ways," replied Daphne, simply. "Well, if I run out of options for the boys, then there will just have to be 2 girl prefects," said Harry. "Would that work?" asked Tracy. "It'll have to. Maybe having that as the end product will result in students in the lower years bucking their ideas up." Dinner was soon nearing an end, when Daphne, Tracy and Astoria stood up to leave, Harry went with them. "Trying to avoid detection, are we?" asked Tracy with a smirk. "Yep," replied Harry. "I've got a date with Padma and I'll be damned if I'm gonna let Snape ruin it." "A date with Harry Potter," said Tracy thoughtfully. "So that's how you're rewarding prefects for good work." "Very funny," muttered Harry. "Won't you two dating cause a conflict of interest?" asked Daphne. "Not in the least," replied Harry. "I can be professional. Besides, does Padma seem like the kind of prefect I'd need to punish?" "I suppose not," agreed Daphne. "She might appreciate a good spanking from you though," added Tracy with a grin, causing Daphne to shriek "Tracy!" and slap her hands over her younger sister's ears as Harry nearly choked on his own tongue. "Remind me to never get you and Hannah Abbott together," said Harry, looking around. They were in the entrance hall now, and he spotted Padma standing over by the golden statue of the wizard who had been employed by the founders to convert an old Muggle castle into a school. "You'd better get going," hissed Daphne. "The greasy one is on the move." "Can't wait to read more exciting chapters." "Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 93, ch.93. Harry nodded and went to make his way over to Padma, but paused and asked, "Wait, you guys call him the greasy one too?" "Of course," said Tracy. "Now if you don't want to spend your evening in his lair, get going." Harry hurried over to Padma and grabbed her by the arm before she could say anything. "Come on, quick," he whispered and pulled her through the front doors and out into the entrance courtyard. From there Harry led her off to the side. "Where are we going?" asked Padma. "Snape's coming," was all that Harry said in reply, but it was enough to get Padma to keep up. They took the narrow pathway which connected the entrance courtyard to the quad, and from there they headed across the wooden suspension bridge, which led them into the base of the astronomy tower. "I think we've lost him," said Harry, finally coming to a stop. "Looks that way," agreed Padma, who looked around before turning back to Harry and asking, "So, why were we running from Snape?" "I saw him go over to you in the Great Hall. He tried to give me a detention for telling Malfoy off," replied Harry, "and, though I know that it will disappoint him greatly, I'm not going." "Oh. You know that avoiding him will just come back and bite you on the butt later on, don't you?" "Probably. Now come on, I believe we plan to take a stroll around the lake." He offered her his arm and, with a smile, she took it, and together they headed off towards the lake. "So, apart from Snape and Malfoy making arses of themselves, how did dinner with the Slytherins go?" asked Padma, and they made their way down the dirt pathway which led to the lake. "It was all right, I suppose. I got a few glares, but after I slapped Malfoy down, everyone else pretty much ignored me. I just sat with Daphne, Tracy, and Astoria like I planned and tried to get the whole experience over with as fast as possible." Padma laughed lightly and commented, "Well, you certainly caused a stir by sitting there. I've never seen Ron Weasley so red in the face. Except maybe at the Yule Ball when Hermione was dancing with Krum. Yet, he didn't go too much on that," said Harry with a grin. "Sorry you had to be stuck with him that evening." "There's no need for you to apologize for him," said Padma, "though you may owe my sister an apology." "Yeah, probably," replied Harry. "Hey, is it weird that I am taking you on a date when I went to the Yule Ball with your twin sister?" "It's only weird if we let it be," said Padma. "I mean, it's not as if you two did any more than have a dance together." "True," said Harry. "I guess I was a bit too busy staring longingly at Cho to pay much attention to your sister." "Right, Cho," said Padma, uncomfortably. "What's the deal there?" "Well, I'll admit to being quite heavily into her least year," answered Harry, "but this year things have gone a bit odd. I mean, I was there when her boyfriend was killed, so that kind of puts her in a weird place for me." "I heard that several people saw her fawning over you on the train," said Padma. "Yeah, I don't really know what to make of that. I know that on some level I should be flattered, but to be honest it's kind of creepy. I mean, I guess I thought that if she ever did seek me out, it would be to ask questions about Cedric's death, not to fawn over me like some kind of, I don't know, boy who lived groupie," suggested Padma. "Yeah," agreed Harry, "it's pretty unsettling to tell you the truth." "I see where you're coming from," said Padma. "I think that there might be something going on with her though. This morning one of the third years mentioned Cedric's name in the common room before we went down to breakfast, and everyone just sort of looked over to her wondering what her reaction would be. But there was nothing. Nothing. Didn't even bat an eyelid." "Well, that is odd. Are you sure she heard what was said?" "I don't know, but she was definitely within hearing range." Harry thought for a moment before shaking his head and commenting, "I don't like this. I think she needs to be watched." "I'll keep an eye on her," said Padma. "Thanks," said Harry before pausing and looking around. "Well, this seems like a good spot." Padma looked around in confusion before asking, "A good place for what?" For an answer, Harry called for Tippy the house elf, who immediately appeared in front of them, carrying a large, wicker picnic basket which she placed on the ground before them and then bowed low and disappeared with a pop. "A picnic, Harry?" asked Padma, sounding surprised. "Yeah," replied Harry. "Why, don't you like them?" "To be honest, I've never had one," said Padma. That's funny, neither have I. He winked at her as he pulled a picnic blanket patterned with alternating red and white squares out of the basket. Padma shook her head fondly and helped him set up. In addition to the blanket, Tippy had included several brass candlesticks and candles, a few plates, bowls, and cutlery. Harry reached into the basket and pulled out a plate of triangularly cut sandwiches. "Okay," he said, "what kind of sandwich would you like?" "We've got beef and lettuce, egg mayonnaise, tuna mayonnaise, ham and cheese or turkey and mustard." "Anything except the beef," replied Padma. "I don't eat that." Harry looked up to her, surprised, and asked why not. "My religion, Harry. Hindus don't eat beef." "I thought that it was the Jewish that didn't eat beef." "No, it's the Hindus. The Jewish don't eat pork, though a lot of Hindus are completely vegetarian." "Oh, well, how about that? You really do learn something every day," said Harry, as he handed her a tuna mayonnaise sandwich before adding, "I hope you're not offended by my not knowing. My relatives weren't really the types to embrace other cultures, and I didn't learn all that much about them in primary school." "It's fine, Harry. Most people in this place don't know and don't care to know." Harry nodded as he reached into the basket and pulled out 2 bottles of butter beer. "Well," he said, uncorking one of the bottles and handing it to Padma, "here's to a nice picnic." "An excellent company," added Padma. They tapped the tops of their bottles together, then took a drink. "Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 94, ch.94. The sun was setting now, and the few wispy, slightly grey clouds in the sky seemed to take on a pinkish hue as Hogwarts Castle was bathed in an orange glow. "It really is a lovely place, isn't it?" asked Padma. "It is," agreed Harry. "We really are quite lucky when you think about it. Some of the interior leaves something to be desired though." Harry smirked and said, "I trust that it's not the creaking suits of armor that you are talking about." "The finest magical institution in Europe is what we were told," said Padma. "If that really is the case, then I pity the rest." "I got told something similar," said Harry, "though I believe it was the world, not just Europe. And then there was something about it being far safer than even Gringotts." Padma looked over at him and smiled reassuringly. "It'll be okay, Harry. They'll all know the truth soon enough." Harry looked at her in surprise. "But I changed my story." "I know. But I'd have to be a fool not to see why. My father may not be allowed on the Wizengamot, but he has a few friends there, including Madame Bones." "Oh," said Harry, suddenly understanding. "Yes, oh. Don't worry, everyone in my family believes you, and so do others." "Then why did no one stand up and help?" Padma shook her head and said, "If there's one thing that I have come to understand during my time at this place, it's to never underestimate the power of stupid people in large numbers." Harry snorted. "Boy, ain't that the truth? If I didn't know better, I'd swear that in addition to the Quidditch Cup and the House Cup, there's a biggest moron cup that most everyone vies for." Padma chuckled and said, "I think that awarding such a thing would be hard to judge." Harry laughed too, and threw a piece of crust out onto the surface of the lake. A moment later a tentacle belonging to the giant squid surfaced, grabbed the crust and disappeared again. "You ever wonder how a creature adapted to a deep-sea environment survives in this lake?" asked Padma as she fished a plate of cauldron cakes out of the picnic basket. "I have thought about it from time to time," said Harry with a grin. "One rumor I heard was that it's actually Godric Gryffindor, still alive in his animagus form." Padma laughed and asked, "Where on earth did you hear something like that?" Harry shrugged. "Some crazy person mentioned it. Surely it's not that unreasonable of an idea. If you had suggested any other wizard throughout history, then yes, there might be a possibility of it, but come on, a person's animagus is related to who that person is. Godric Gryffindor would have been a lion of a griffin, not a giant squid. I suppose. Gryffindor house is usually associated with the element of fire, and the squid is clearly aquatic. And water is the element associated with Slytherin, said Padma. Dear Merlin, I hope that the squid isn't actually Salazar Slytherin. I'd better buy a harpoon, just in case, said Harry. Not every Slytherin is out to get you, Harry. I know, but based on past experience, why take the chance? Padma just smiled and shook her head. They remained like that for several hours, eating and drinking a little bit at a time and talking about everything and nothing. Padma managed to coax out of him what had gone bad between himself and Hermione, and listened as he talked about learning of his family over the last few weeks of the summer. Harry learned that Padma's family was in the business of growing tea and importing it to the UK. Her uncle lived in India, overseeing production, and her father, living in England, was in charge of distribution. Padma's older brother, who had finished Hogwarts before she had started, was currently working for their father, and Padma planned to do the same, whereas Parvati wanted to do something else with her life. When the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Harry lit the candles and they stayed there for another hour before deciding that it was time to head back inside. As they neared the steps leading into the castle, Harry's mind became preoccupied with one thought: should he kiss her? He planned on walking her back to her common room, but was it right to end the night on a kiss? He honestly didn't know if he was supposed to or not, and was silently hoping that Padma would give him some kind of clue. Sadly, it was not to be. Not because Padma refused, but because of outside forces. Harry had had such an enjoyable few hours, and was so worried about his problem on the walk back that he completely forgot why he and Padma had left the castle in such a hurry earlier. They reached the top of the steps, pushed open the doors and immediately came to stop at the sound of a voice which asked in a Scottish accent, "Enjoying yourselves, are we?" The pair looked ahead and found that their way was blocked by the usual trio of Albus Dumbledore, Minerva McGonagall, and Severus Snape. One look at each of their faces told Harry all that he needed to know, and he heaved a heavy sigh before muttering, "Oh, balls. Can't wait to read more exciting chapters." Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 95, ch.95. Dolores Umbridge felt that her first day at Hogwarts had gone quite well. No one had acted too much out of line in her classes, and she already had a good amount of information to report to the Ministry. From the tests that she had assigned each of her classes throughout the day, it was blindingly obvious that the standards for History of Magic class at Hogwarts were just as bad as the Ministry had feared. Added to that, there was the evidence of the anti-ministerial actions being carried out by certain Hogwarts staff that Mr. Potter had provided her. The behavior of Severus Snape was proof that he was against the Ministry. That Dumbledore worked so hard to protect the man for so many years would be a big nail in the old man's coffin as well. She was in her office, just making a final few notes on a piece of parchment before retreating to her quarters for nightcap and an early night, when there was a knock at the door. Curious as to who could be calling at this hour, she pushed her chair back from the desk, got up and walked over to the door. She was quite surprised to find a rather angry-looking Harry Potter standing on the other side. "Mr. Potter? What brings you here at this hour?" "Snape is attempting to punish me for doing my job," he replied without preamble. She nodded in understanding and said, "Well, you'd better come in then and tell me the whole story." And he did. "And then," he went on several minutes later, "we came back to the castle and Snape, Dumbledore, and McGonagall were standing there blocking the path, and Dumbledore informed me that I now have a month's worth of detentions with Snape. When I tried to explain what had happened, Dumbledore just told me that he trusts Snape and will not have students questioning his authority. Then he gave Padma a week's detention with Filch and took 20 points from Ravenclaw for assisting me in avoiding my detention." "And what was Professor McGonagall doing during this?" asked Umbridge. "Nothing. She just stood there and kept silent, like she normally does." "Very well. You should have come and seen me about Snape's behavior at dinner before you went off with Miss Paddle, but either way his behavior is still reprehensible." Rest assured that I will bring your complaints to the attention of the ministry. Harry shook his head. No, he said, no, that's not enough. Snape has been behaving like this for years and keeps on getting away with it. Dumbledore keeps on protecting him. I want to go to the ministry and talk to someone in the W.E.A. department. Umbridge looked over to her clock that hung on the wall. Well, if we leave now, then there should be a few staff from the Wizarding Examinations Authority still lingering about. You want to come with me? Asked Harry. As a professor, I cannot simply allow you to leave the school premises unescorted, replied Umbridge. Come on, we'll use the fireplace in my office so as to avoid detection. Breakfast the following morning found Harry once again sitting with the Gryffindor students. Most of them were giving him wary looks, probably due to the fact that he had sat with the Slytherins the previous evening. Harry was pointedly ignoring Ron's scowling expression when someone took a seat next to him. He turned to look, and found that it was Parvati Patil, Padma's twin sister. She had a pleasant smile on her face as she said, "So, I hear you went on a date with my sister yesterday." "I certainly did," replied Harry, not entirely sure where she would be going with this. "Good," said Parvati. "I was wondering when she's finally show an interest in boys. But know this," she added in an undertone, "if you hurt her, I'll rip your bollocks off and wear them as a necklace, got it?" There was a hint of playfulness in her eyes that told Harry that she would not go that far, but an edge to her voice that told him she would hurt him if he hurt Padma. This allowed him to comment, "Well, you wouldn't be a very good sister if you didn't. But I have no intention of hurting your sister, and if I do, I'm sure she'll let me know." Parvati kissed him on the cheek and was just turning to help herself to a piece of toast when the doors to the Great Hall opened. The students fell silent as a group of people made their way into the Great Hall. There was Griselda Marchbanks, accompanied by 3 other members of the Wizarding Examinations Authority, Madame Bones of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement with 2 law enforcement officers and an Auror, and 8 of the 12 members of the Hogwarts Board of Governors, who appeared to be led by Neville's grandmother, Augusta Longbottom. At the staff table, Dumbledore stood up and addressed the guests, trying to keep a tone of puzzlement out of his voice. "Madame Bones, Madame Marchbanks, Madame Longbottom, to what do we owe this pleasure?" "This isn't a social call, Dumbledore," said Augusta. "We have each received several complaints about the conduct of several individuals at this castle, and we're here to learn more before taking official action." One of W.E.A. members stepped forwards and said, "Will the following pupils and staff please come with us for questioning?" He pulled out a roll of parchment and unfurled it and read out a list of names: Minerva McGonagall, Phileas Flitwick, Poppy Pomfrey, Astoria Greengrass, Daphne Greengrass, Tracy Davis, Pansy Parkinson, Millicent Bulstrode, Sophie Roper, Draco Malfoy, Vincent Crabbe, Gregory Goyle, Ryan Spinks, Theodore Nott, Blaise Zabinai, Ronald Weasley, Seamus Finnegan, Dean Thomas, Neville Longbottom, Hermione Granger, Lavender Brown, Faye Dunbar, Georgina Smith, Kella Mitchell, Parvati Patil, and Padma Patil. Around the hall, all those named were exchanging looks as they all got up out of their seats. Each of them was wondering what these people could want with them. Of the students, only Padma suspected that she knew what was going on, and was wondering how Harry had arranged this so quickly. Dumbledore noted that Harry was the only Gryffindor, well, formerly, to not receive a summons, but he could not immediately put the rest together. "Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 96, ch.96. Snape stood up and said, "No one will be questioning my Slytherins without their head of house present." "Sit down, boy, before I make you," snapped Madame Marchbanks, and Snape dropped back into his seat, seething but cowed for now. As the group began to file out of the Great Hall, Madame Marchbanks addresses those who remained behind. "Madame Umbridge, can you come with us as well? I suggest that the rest of you get to your lessons. If any of you have transfiguration, history, or charms, remain in the hall and Mr. Potter will supervise you in a study session. I trust that any prefects who remain will help him in this. She turned to two of the other W.E.A members and addressed them. Please remain here and assist Mr. Potter should he require it. Professor Tofty and I will call you if we need you. The young man and woman nodded and their two aged superiors followed the rest out of the hall. Harry looked around and found that he had been left with the fifth-year Hufflepuffs who, like him, had charms, the third-year Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs who had history and the second-year Gryffindors and Slytherins who had transfiguration. Hannah approached him and snapped off a mock salute. Prefect Abbott reporting for duty, sir. Madam Marchbanks led them all the way up to the 7th floor corridor and gathered them in a group beside the portrait of Barnabas the Barmy. They all watched in confusion as they walked away from them and then turned and walked back towards them before turning away again, turning back, turning away, and turning back one final time. Much to their surprise, a door materialized in the wall, getting a smile from the elderly witch. Excellent, it's still here. What is? Asked Professor Flitwick. Why, the room of requirement, my dear Professor, Marchbanks replied as she opened the door. In you go. The group filed in through the door and found themselves in a large room that none there had ever seen in Hogwarts before. To the Muggleborns amongst them, it looked rather like the departure lounge at an airport, with several long rows of seats situated back to back and little else besides. On the opposite side of the room there was another door. As Madam Bones was telling the Auror and law enforcement officers to guard the door that led out into the 7th floor corridor, Madam Marchbanks addressed the group. Each of you will take a seat and wait quietly. We will be on the other side of that door over there. When your name is called, you will come through and answer a few questions that we have for you. Understand? Everyone nodded and began to take seats. McGonagall felt a hand on her arm and turned to see that it was Madam Longbottom, who said, "We'll start with you, Minerva, if you please." McGonagall nodded and followed the others into the next room. Once the door to the next room was closed, Draco got up and made his way over to the door that led back out into the 7th floor corridor. He was just reaching for the handle of the door when the Auror was suddenly blocking his way and asking, "Just where do you think you're going?" "I'm leaving," said Draco. "You can't keep me here without my father or my head of house present." "Actually, we can," said the Auror. "Now sit down and be quiet." The boy's face flushed with anger. "Don't you know who I am? My father can have your job." The Auror smirked as he replied, "I know exactly who you are, little boy, and I am almost certain that your father will try. But I am absolutely certain that he will not be pleased to know that his precious little scion attempted to defy the instructions of the Board of Governors, the head of the W.E.A, the head of the D.M.L.E and 3 of her staff. Now sit down, be quiet and let the adults sort things out." Fuming and humiliated, Draco turned away from the Auror and took the seat that he had previously vacated. The Auror smirked. Apparently little Malfoy did not know that the Ministry had been putting some distance between himself and Daddy Malfoy for the past few weeks. McGonagall found herself sitting on one side of a large ornate desk with Madam Bones, Madam Marchbanks, Professor Tofty, Professor Umbridge and the majority of the Hogwarts governors sitting on the other side. Deciding to get right down to it, she asked, "So what seems to be the problem?" "Harry Potter had filed 2 complaints against staff at this school with the WEA," explained Madam Marchbanks. "One of these complaints is against the headmaster and the other is against the head of Slytherin." McGonagall sighed wearily. She should have seen this coming. "Mr. Potter has also filed a harassment complaint with my department against both men," added Madam Bones. "Mr. Potter claims to have been victimized by both men since returning to the castle 2 days ago," said Madam Longbottom, "and claims that Snape has been doing so for a lot longer. We wanted to get your thoughts on the subject before taking serious action." McGonagall put her face in her hands. This was going to be a long day. "Can't wait to read more exciting chapters. Then what are you waiting for? Join my Patreon right now. Get 60+ premium chapters. Link, patreon.com/earthly_writer, remove the asterisk. 2 chapters for all free members. Chapter 97, ch.97. Dumbledore was in a bind. He had intended to follow on behind the castle's guests in order to discover what was going on, but with the crowd of students exiting the hall to make their way to their classes he had lost track of them. Now he was roaming the castle looking for them. He had finally put two and two together and had not liked what he had come up with. The majority of the students taken in for questioning had been in the same potions class as Mr. Potter the previous day when he and Severus had their little disagreement. Of the others, Astoria Greengrass had been involved in the situation on the train, as had Padma Patil. Miss Patil had also been present the previous evening when Dumbledore had informed Harry that he would be serving detentions with Severus for the rest of the month. Phileas had been brought in over the issue on the train as well. Minerva had been involved in one way or another with most of the things that had happened regarding Harry over the past few days, and Poppy had been the member of staff who had looked over Harry's potion and had given it her approval. To Dumbledore it was obvious that Harry had decided to complain about Severus's behavior and had done so to anyone who would listen. Now Dumbledore needed to find them so that he could calm everyone down and smooth the situation over before they did something stupid like kick Severus out of the castle. Such an end was unthinkable. Harry looked around the great hall feeling a little out of his depth. He had been put in charge of more than 60 students, tasked with supervising them all during an impromptu study period. The problem was, they weren't studying. Sure, most of them had their books out, but they were paying them little mind, choosing instead to talk loudly amongst themselves. Some were taking the opportunity to catch up with friends in other houses whom they had not had a chance to talk to since returning to the castle 2 days ago, while others were discussing why so many of their fellow students had been taken away for questioning by the Board of Governors and representatives from both the Department of Magical